det der. Men sådan det var.
Hvad er det, hvor?
She was mom's Spanish girl.
Male or female?
Female.
On August 25th, 1996, a local passerby made an emergency 999 call to the authorities upon discovering the lifeless body of a young female on the banks of the River Leven in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland. Police divers pulled the victim's body from the River Leven. The extensive skull fractures indicated unimaginable violence endured by the victim before her death. Who could inflict such a heinous act on a defenseless child, and why? Most importantly, why did the family have to wait 28 painful years to receive the justice they rightfully deserved? The victim was identified as Carolyn Glacken. Her story is not for the faint-hearted. Carolyn was just 14 years old when she was discovered face down, partly submerged in the river, a tragic event that coincided with her mother's 40th birthday. Carolyn was born on January 8, 1982, in Derry, Northern Ireland. As an only child, she lived with her parents, William and Margaret Glacken, in Bonnhill, West Dunbartonshire, Scotland. At the time of her death, she was a 14-year-old student at Our Lady in St. Patrick's High School in Dunbarton. On the night of August 24, 1996, after spending time with friends, Carolyn was seen by her best friend, Joanne Menzies, near shops close to her home at 2354. She was last spotted at 15 minutes after midnight, walking down Dilchip Lane toward the now demolished Dilchip Bridge, locally known as the Black Bridge, and then onto the river towpath. The following day, a passerby discovered Carolyn's partially submerged body in the River Leven near Bonnhill in Renton. She'd sustained extensive injuries to her scalp, face, and neck from blunt force trauma. Carolyn's funeral was held on February 26, 1997 in Alexandria. At the onset of the investigation, the police initially focused on tracing Carolyn's movements on the night she disappeared. A taxi driver who claimed to have seen her provided information. The taxi driver, who said he knew Carolyn, had seen a hooded figure walking about 30 yards behind her. A photo-fit image of this figure was circulated on appeal posters and featured on the BBC's Crime Watch UK program, but ultimately turned out to be a red herring. Later investigation revealed that on the night of August 24, 1996, Carolyn intended to meet with her boyfriend, Robert O'Brien, also known as Robbie, at a bridge, despite warnings from her best friend. Joanne Menzies, Carolyn's best friend, revealed that Carolyn had been seeing O'Brien for about 3 months. Menzies described Carolyn as very impressionable and a bit infatuated with O'Brien, and she believed the relationship was violent. Menzies had intervened on numerous occasions to stop O'Brien from attacking Carolyn. She stated Carolyn was happy and cheerful when they met around 2200 on August 24th. At the time, Robert O'Brien was the prime suspect. Names like Donna Marie Brand, Andrew Kelly, and Sarah Jane O'Neill were also circulated in the village since they were the last seen together with Carolyn, but the evidence was insufficient to arrest and charge them. While they all maintained the same alibi, claiming they spent the night of the murder at Ms. Betty Wilson's flat at 12 Allen Crescent. On the night of the murder, Andrew Kelly was entrusted with caring for Ms. Betty Wilson's 2 children, Archie and Jamie Wilson. The case went cold due to insufficient evidence against the suspects. In September 2006, a £15,000 reward was offered for information regarding Carolyn Glacken's murder, followed by a further appeal by Police Scotland in 2015. In June 2019, Police Scotland's major investigation team began to re-examine the case. Detective Inspector Stuart Granger, the senior investigating officer, faced several challenges, including the lack of digital forensic evidence, valuable CCTV footage, DNA profiles of the suspects, and a murder weapon. The team focused on a witness management strategy, finding that while some individuals questioned at the time were now deceased, others, now parents themselves, were more cooperative. An advancement came from Linda Dorian, Betty Wilson's upstairs neighbor. Dorian recalled seeing the 4 suspects leaving Wilson's house with Betty Wilson's children, Archie and Jamie Wilson, around midnight on the night of the murder. Independent witnesses began hearing screams from the River Leven around 12:30, with a female voice saying, "I did not say that. I did not do that." About 40 minutes later, Linda Dorian saw the group returning and heard someone exclaim, "That wasn't meant to happen. that went too far. How's this gonna look? Followed by, the weans, meaning children in the Scottish dialect. She also heard a female wailing and sobbing. This crucial testimony led investigators to focus on the 4 suspects. Detective Inspector Granger noted that these details were not uncovered in 1996 because the relevant questions weren't asked. Additionally, widespread heroin use in Renton during the late 1990s complicated witness reliability, and there was a culture of fear surrounding Robbie O'Brien's influential family, which discouraged people from speaking out. Detective Inspector Granger emphasized the importance of asking the right questions and acknowledged the challenges posed by the chaotic lives of potential witnesses at the time. Carolyn's teenage killers were all drug users who shoplifted to support their habits. Robbie O'Brien, 18, was in a relationship with 17-year-old Donna Marie Brand, who was pregnant at the time of the murder. He also saw 14-year-old Carolyn, described as infatuated with him. Their relationship began that summer, and the couple attended an Oasis concert at Ballock Castle Country Park just 3 weeks before Carolyn's death. Carolyn's mother and friends disapproved of the relationship, knowing that O'Brien, described by police as a violent bully, had assaulted her. Police established that when Brand went home on Saturday nights, O'Brien would typically arrange to meet Carolyn at a bridge over the river. On the night of her murder, Carolyn had invited her best friend Joanne and 2 boys for a sleepover while her mother was out celebrating her 40th birthday. However, Carolyn never joined them, instead making the fateful decision to meet up with O'Brien. The breakthrough in Carolyn Glacken's case came through the testimony of Archie Wilson, a 4-year-old boy at the time of the murder. Archie, usually energetic, slept in late in the morning following Carolyn's death. His mother, Betty Wilson, discovered him drying wet trousers on the fire, indicating something unusual had happened. Upon questioning, Archie mentioned being taken to the River Leven at night. Initially, Archie's account wasn't fully considered, but later interviews and a child psychologist's assessment validated his testimony as a lived event. Archie recounted seeing Carolyn being attacked and pushed into the water by a person named Robbie, who struck her with a stick and a pole. He vividly described Carolyn's injuries, including a metal object in her eye, a detail unknown to the public until then. Archie's testimony contradicted the killer's alibi and played a crucial role in their conviction. In November 2021, Robert O'Brien, Andrew Kelly, and Donna Marie Brand were charged with Carolyn's murder. The trial commenced at the High Court in Glasgow in November 2023, resulting in their conviction on December 14, 2023. O'Brien and Kelly were sentenced to life imprisonment in January 2024, while Brand will also be sentenced for her role in the murder. O'Brien, the primary perpetrator, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years. Kelly, while playing a lesser role, was also sentenced to life with a minimum term of 18 years. Brand's sentencing was postponed because she was deemed unfit to attend court. Judge Lord Braid, presiding over the trial, emphasized the severity of the crime, stating that O'Brien's actions were particularly heinous. He highlighted the cruelty inflicted on Carolyn, leading to her drowning in the river. Kelly, though playing a lesser role, was still involved in the violent attack on Carolyn. The killer's alibi, maintained for 27 years, was ultimately disproven with the help of crucial witness testimony.
I know it might not look like it, but I am over the moon. I just couldn't have asked for anything better. I don't think closure is the right word, but justice is certainly the right word.
Detective Chief Inspector Stuart Granger expressed gratitude to the public for their assistance in the investigation and for coming forward with vital information regarding Carolyn's tragic death. After years of tirelessly fighting for justice, Carolyn's mother can finally find some solace. Carolyn's tragic passing had a lasting effect on both her family and the broader community. Rather than celebrating milestones and accomplishments, her memory remains a poignant reminder of the vibrant and innocent child she once was, frozen in time and dearly cherished. Barbara Tucker was a 19-year-old sophomore business student at Mount Hood Community College, Gresham, in 1980. On January 15th, she was on her way to evening class on campus when she suddenly ran out of a bushy, wooded area on Northeast Kane Drive. Several cars had to swerve and brake to avoid hitting the young woman, and one driver was almost unsuccessful. Barbara had mud and blood on her face and was waving her arms in an attempt to flag down cars, but no one pulled over. A strange man also ran out of the woody area, grabbed Barbara by the arm, and pulled her back into the woods. Some witnesses would later tell the police that they thought it was just college students playing pranks or a youthful game of dodging traffic. That next morning, a fellow student on his way to class found Barbara's body in the shrubs. She was half-dressed, had been physically assaulted and beaten to death. No one saw the strange man, and for 4 decades, a lot of people, including Barbara's siblings, never thought he would ever be found. Who was the strange man? What was the connection between him and Barbara? And why did this case take 44 long years to get solved? On February 25, 1960, in Portland, Oregon, Louise and Albert Tucker had a baby girl. She was the youngest of 7 children, and the Tuckers named their baby girl Barbara May Tucker. Barbie, as her family fondly called her, was strong, tall, athletic, and put it to good use on the Cleveland High School basketball court. She participated in a national competition and won awards while involved with Distributive Education Clubs of America, a club for students interested in business and retail. In the summertime, she worked at Sears. Family and friends described her as goofy and ambitious. She was the first in the Tucker family to go to college. Barbara loved writing songs, poems, and playing her guitar. She dreamed of opening her own craft supply shop one day after she got a business degree. Despite being the Tucker family's baby, Barbara grew up independent. After high school, Barbara moved to Gresham, where she began attending Mount Hood Community College. Sadly, Barbara's life was taken from her at the age of 19, just 2 years into college. Barbara had an evening consumer credits practices class on January 15, 1980. She'd spoken to her mother about her plans for the night. The night was rainy and chilly, but she'd go grab ice cream with a friend after her class. Witnesses who drove by saw Barbara running onto Northeast Kane Drive from the wooded area on the west edge of campus. They recalled thinking she was waving at someone and trying to get people's attention. However, no one stopped to confirm. A witness recalled seeing a man lead Barbara back into the wooded area. The next time Barbara would be seen, she was lifeless in a grove of trees. She was partially naked, and her purse and books were found next to her. The police quickly arrived at the scene, and a medical examiner determined she'd been physically assaulted and beaten to death. The investigation began, but there was never any progress. There was no evidence, and the numerous eyewitnesses were of no use to the case. No one could remember what the strange man looked like. Time went by, Barbara's case began to freeze over, and her loved ones struggled to move on.
Susan has told me that there was a day that goes by in the past 44 years that not one day that she doesn't think about Barbie.
Barbara's father, Albert Tucker, did not take her death well. According to his other children, the first time they ever saw their father cry was when the news of her death reached the family. And in the weeks, months, and years that followed, Albert was still obviously hurting over the loss of his daughter. He would immediately leave the room whenever anyone mentioned Barbara. Sadly, he passed away in 1989 without ever getting closure for his beloved daughter. Her mother, Louise Tucker, on the other hand, expressed her grief and hurt differently. She held onto everything Barbara left behind. She bought a single yellow rose and planted it in the family home's garden. The rose bush grew strong and tall like Barbie, and it would blossom every spring. Louise would write letters to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office often. Norm Frink was the chief deputy of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office when the office was in charge of the case in the 1980s. Norm mentioned how frequently Louise wrote to the office and how frustrated he felt because the case didn't seem to be going anywhere. Louise passed away in 1995, but till she died, she never forgave herself. She believed that the reason this happened to Barbara was because she'd let her move to Gresham for college. It had been raining in the evening of January 15, 1980, and the Tuckers believed Barbara had gotten a ride from a stranger to get to her campus. Louise kept lamenting that maybe if Barbara had gone to a college closer to home, she wouldn't have gotten into a stranger's car. One of her siblings would have dropped her off and she'd still be alive. While Barbara remained 19 in memories and pictures, all of her friends grew older and began to work towards their dreams. Barbara's childhood best friend, Maria Adrian, was very affected by Barbara's murder. Maria got married and became a mom, and as her children grew, she anxiously waited for them to pass the milestones Barbara never got to achieve. After her children graduated from college, got married, and settled into their lives, she could finally breathe, she said. Barbara's case aged and soon became the oldest unsolved homicide case in Gresham, but that was about to change. In 2000, vaginal swabs taken during Barbara's autopsy were sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab for analysis. The crime lab developed a DNA profile from the swabs. The detectives never gave up on Barbara's case, and in their pursuit, worked with Cece Moore, a Virginia-based genetic genealogist who runs a group called DNA Detectives. The DNA sample collected at the crime scene was entered into the GEDmatch database, and a match emerged. Finally, in 2021, a genealogist with Parabon Nanolabs using DNA technology identified a Robert Plimpton as a likely contributor to the unknown DNA profile developed in 2000. Detectives with the Gresham Police Department found that Robert was living in Troutdale, Oregon, and had begun conducting surveillance immediately. During their surveillance, the detectives saw Robert spit a piece of chewing gum onto the ground, which they collected and submitted to the OSP Crime Lab. The lab determined the DNA profile developed from the chewing gum matched the DNA profile developed from Barbara's swabs. On June 8, 2021, Robert Plimpton was arrested as he drove away from the Troutdale home and lodged at the Multnomah County Detention Center. He was charged with murder, rape, and abuse and was held on a $500,000 bail. This was the first arrest made in the Barbara Tucker case, which at this point was 41 years old. Lisa Plimpton, Robert Plimpton's wife, said the arrest was a shock and that her husband denied the accusation of killing Tucker. She mentioned that she and her husband were 15 and 16-year-old students at Reynolds High School in Troutdale when the news of Barbara's murder spread. According to Lisa, the only way Robert knew of Barbara was through the news. In the decades that followed Barbara's death, Robert had worked up quite a rap sheet. Court records show he'd been convicted 3 times for fourth-degree assault, twice for kidnapping, and also has multiple convictions for driving under the influence of intoxicants, as well as other traffic violations. According to the Oregon Department of Corrections, he was convicted of second-degree kidnapping in Multnomah County in 1985, for which he served a 30-month sentence. He also served 2 6-month sentences for DUI charges and parole violations. Oregon court records also show Robert was arrested in 1997 by Portland police on allegations that were similar to Barbara's case. He was accused of attempted assault in an attack on a woman. Court records say investigators had suspected that Robert drove her to a secluded place and attacked her. An officer later came across the woman, who was crying and injured. The case was dismissed after a grand jury found insufficient evidence to file a criminal complaint. Lisa maintained that her husband had turned his life around and had been sober for 25 years. At the time of Robert's arrest, he'd been married to Lisa for 18 years, and they also had a son. Barbara's friends and family found it unsettling and disappointing that her attacker was so close by for over 4 decades and no one knew about it. Troutdale was 16 miles east of Portland and 6 miles northeast of Gresham. Robert had pleaded not guilty to the charges and claimed to not fit the suspect's description. The trial started on February 26, 2024, and lasted until March 15th. Chief Deputy District Attorney Kirsten Snowden and Senior Deputy District Attorney Todd Jackson represented the state, and Robert was defended by Stephen Howes.
Next matter, page 17, line 3.
Robert Plimpton of Troutdale in court Wednesday to face murder, rape, and sex abuse charges. This virtual hearing is long overdue, to say the least.
Robert's defense chose a bench hearing before Multnomah County Circuit Court Judge Amy Baggio over a grand jury, and the trial for the assault and murder of Barbara Tucker began. Attorney Kirsten Snowden clarified to the court that there's no evidence to establish a connection between 16-year-old Robert and 19-year-old Barbara. The defense argued that there was unmistakable, unavoidable, reasonable doubt about who killed Barbara. The eyewitnesses from the scene and the state's witnesses testified that the man they saw drag Barbara back into the bushes was as tall as Barbara, and others claimed that he was taller than her. That should make Robert nearly or over 6 feet tall. Robert, however, was 5 foot 8 inches. The defense lawyer also said that the only DNA evidence the investigators presented was the chewing gum they picked off the ground. They didn't test Robert's clothing to confirm the results of the OSP crime lab. Judge Baggio delivered her verdict on March 15, 2024, and found Robert guilty of 1 count of murder in the first degree and 4 counts of different theories of murder in the second degree. The judge clarified that the prosecutor failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Robert assaulted Barbara while she was still alive, hence the reason he was found not guilty for the assault charge. However, there's no doubt that Robert beat Barbara in her face and head until the 19-year-old died. While his sentencing is pending in front of Judge Baggio, he currently remains in custody in Multnomah County. Barbara's siblings expressed their joy and relief when the police first informed them of their first arrest in Barbara's case. 2 members of the Tucker family who were present in the verdict hearing wept and embraced after Robert's verdict was announced. Barbara's older sister, Alice Swan, mentioned how she thought the case might never be cracked, but her family was thrilled that the once rigid case was finally solved. It took 44 years, and their parents were not here to see it, but their Barbie finally got justice.
I was older than that. It was Barney. I was little. And that was my last time I've seen my mom.
On August 10, 1996, 2 young girls, Pamela and Michelle Ames, aged 9 and 5, were playing peacefully in their home in Jacksonville, Florida. The young girls were under the care of their loving 31-year-old mother. That day, however, their laughter was replaced by rushed breathing and panic as they couldn't find their mother. Their patient waiting brought no change to the deafening silence of the void left by the prolonged absence of their mother. This was very unusual for the caring mother who never left her daughters alone for long. Sadly, when the sisters did hear about their mom, it forever altered the course of their lives. Their mother, Valerie Ames, was found several hours later, beaten, stabbed, and dead in a vacant apartment far away from her home. However, the apartment didn't belong to any of her friends or family. In fact, the homeowner wasn't even present in the house when she was murdered. How did Valerie end up in an unoccupied apartment? What had happened inside the empty house that ended with her losing her life? And above all, how was the long-standing cold case finally solved after 28 years? Valerie Ames was known for her positive energy and her fondness for animals and her kids. The gentle soul loved riding horses, camping, and most of all, taking care of her little babies. While Valerie's friends and neighbors remembered her as always being full of life, all of it was very cruelly drained from her in August 1996. Valerie was found dead in a pool of blood with numerous stab wounds. Notably, she was found in a residence at the Courtyard Apartments on King Street in the neighborhood of Riverside, Jacksonville. Her corpse was discovered after an alarm was raised by her neighbors when her daughters reached out to them and revealed that their mom was missing. An investigation revealed that the person who actually owned the apartment had been arrested just a day before and placed behind bars for an unrelated crime. But if the owner of the apartment had such a rock-solid and bulletproof alibi, how did Valerie get into the house on that ill-fated day? The arrested owner said that the place had been left unlocked when he was taken away. Apart from the killer who had stabbed and badly beaten Valerie, the murder weapon was also missing. However, the Jacksonville Police Department found over 30 pieces of evidence in the apartment that they hoped would help them hunt the attacker down. Although the cops worked hard to test all the evidence, the technology of 1996 didn't allow them the edge needed to expose the murderer. As a result, the case got shelved amongst the other cold cases, while the evidence was stored away in the hopes that it would be useful later on. While the police had their hands tied, Valerie's kids were forced to swallow their pain and grow up without the loving touch of their mother. The murder of Valerie Ames was still sitting unresolved in a corner of the Jacksonville Police Archives in 2018. That year, however, saw the resurrection of the 500-page case file at the request of Valerie's daughters. Detective Harmony Brooks and her team revealed that they'd reopened the case and were confident of finding the killer now. While the case was 22 years old at that point, forensic technology had also evolved in that time. Detective Brooks spoke to First Coast News and assisted the channel in releasing a cold case documentary on Valerie Ames. She said that there were over 30 pieces of evidence found at the crime scene that day that would now be tested with modern equipment to hunt Valerie's killer down. The police found some breadcrumbs to follow. Slowly, the Jacksonville police pieced several things together and made use of new advanced DNA testing methods in the hopes of identifying the killer. The 22-year delay did pose several challenges, but detectives were determined to catch the killer this time. Finally, in April 2024, the police got the breakthrough they needed 6 years after reopening the case from 1996. On April 2, 2024, the Jacksonville Police Department announced that they'd made an arrest in the Valerie Ames homicide case. The suspect, 69-year-old Jerry Phillips, was apprehended after almost 28 years. The announcement was made by Jacksonville Police Sheriff T.K. Waters at a press conference. Sheriff Waters spoke to the media and restored the public faith in police work and how detectives work very hard on every case. The apprehended suspect was picked up from Johnson County in North Carolina and charged with the murder of Valerie Ames. It was also revealed that the killer wasn't a random stranger to his victim. Despite the questions of the media, Sheriff Waters didn't reveal what exactly led them to Phillips, but said he was happy to finally catch him. Phillips was charged with battery and second-degree murder, which says that Valerie's murder wasn't premeditated, but circumstantial. This further begs the question of what exactly happened to the 31-year-old. It also raises the question of whether Jerry was the only person involved in this. Michelle James, the younger daughter of Valerie Ames, who was only 5 at the time of her killing, also made a media appearance after the arrest of Phillips. Michelle, who had only a handful of photographs to keep her mom alive in her heart, expressed both joy and anger when her old wound was reopened. She said that all she and her family had been waiting for was to see Valerie get justice.
Standing here today at almost 28 years later, we now have some answers on our beautiful mother, Valerie, and she has finally reached her chance to have justice. Her voice can finally be heard, and we want nothing but that justice.
The Valerie Ames case is still ongoing, and more elements will soon be revealed, following which Jerry Phillips will also face a court trial. Although all those 28 years of struggle can't be reversed, Michelle and her family can now breathe a little easier. August 8th, 2000. A quiet day in Beckley, West Virginia, took a chilling turn. Natasha Alex Carter, a bright-eyed child, and her mother, Susan Carter, 41, vanished into thin air. There were no hints, no clues, just an unsettling void where their presence once filled the air. Susan's life with her new husband, Larry Webb, added another layer of complexity to the disappearance. How could a mother and daughter vanish without a trace from the comfort of their own home? Or were they taken away from this world by someone close that they trusted? And ultimately, what kept this story buried in cold case files for 24 years? For Rick Lafferty, Alex's father, it was like waking from a dream to find his daughter erased from existence. She never called him or reached out to him. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and the search for Alex and Susan yielded no answers. They'd seemingly evaporated into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Rick held a strong belief about who might be responsible for his family's disappearance, but the challenge was getting someone in the authorities to take him seriously. However, sometimes all it takes is one person in the right place to change everything, and Rick didn't give up until he found that person: FBI Special Agent Jennifer King. When the United States Marshal Service brought the missing case to the FBI's attention, Rick felt nobody else would listen to him except for Agent King. It was Agent King who then decided she wouldn't rest until Alex was found. With the help of other law enforcement personnel, she brought new energy to the case, reigniting hope and finding out what happened to Alex. In the initial stages of her disappearance, people suspected her mother might have taken her and left West Virginia. Because Susan had a rough relationship with Rick, she moved in with Webb at his residence in Beckley. At the same time, there's an ongoing custody dispute between Susan and Rick. The FBI's documents reveal Susan had told Rick during their custody dispute that he'd never see his daughter again. They also warned the public that Susan might change her appearance and use the alias Susan Gail Carter Webb. Alex's grandmother, Shirley Day, also remembered Alex saying she was afraid of her mother and didn't want to live with her. She vividly recalled Alex's testimony in court during the custody battle, where Alex expressed her fears. Rick believed Alex disappeared months before the official missing date listed on posters. He also claimed that Susan didn't show up for the next court hearing, which led him to being granted full custody. But by then, it might have been too late. Even though posters said Alex was last seen on August 8, 2000, Rick believed she went missing months earlier, soon after Susan's clear warning that he would never see Alex again. The FBI offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to a resolution in the case. Law enforcement officials suspected Susan of abducting Alex, and a felony warrant for kidnapping was issued for Susan on November 13, 2000. At an FBI press conference, Rick tearfully pleaded for his daughter's return, expressing his longing to have her back home no matter the circumstances. 20 years passed since Alex and Susan disappeared, and age progression photos created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children depicted what Alex and Susan might look like in 2021. Rick suspected Susan's new husband, Larry Webb, might be responsible for Alex's disappearance. The FBI shared the suspicion and executed 2 search warrants at Webb's home. And that's when they made a chilling discovery. During an August 2023 search, officers found a bullet lodged in a remodeled bedroom wall, along with traces of blood. Forensic testing confirmed the DNA on the bullet matched Alex's, leading to an unsettling realization of the violence that may have occurred. Caregiver Terry Lilly, who looked after Webb, recounted the searches that led to this shocking discovery, emphasizing the significance of the evidence found behind the bedroom wall.
They had taken a section of wall out in the time before and came back months later and said that after DNA testing, they had found a bullet in the wall and blood that had dripped down into the base of the wall. DNA testing shows they related had belonged to the girl.
Now, DNA testing confirmed that all the collected evidence belonged to the missing girl. Sadly, just days after that interview, Terry passed away. However, investigators also gathered witness statements, further contributing to the mounting evidence against Webb. When asked about the additional evidence leading to the indictment in 2023, authorities were cautious due to the ongoing nature of the investigation. They mentioned DNA evidence and witness statements, but refrained from divulging specific details at that point. One neighbor, whose name wasn't disclosed, who moved to Kyle Lane in 1999, claimed to have seen a young girl at Webb's house during the summer of 2000. Although he only saw her once, he became suspicious when he noticed a missing child poster in the neighborhood a year later. In 2021, upon learning about the investigation into missing persons, he believed the child he saw was Alex Carter. The neighbor also recalled seeing another woman at Webb's house shortly after Susan and Alex disappeared. This newfound statement was a breakthrough for detectives, redirecting their focus squarely onto Webb for a confession regarding the fate of Alex and her mother. Webb, now elderly, allegedly suffered from dementia, which he purportedly used to his advantage. According to Webb and his caregiver, his memory was failing, and he claimed not to remember anything about the disappearance of the mother and daughter. Despite being romantically involved in Susan, he professed love for both her and Alex, strongly denying any involvement in their disappearance. He insisted that he'd searched for them over the years and recalled being away on a trip when they went missing. However, he believed he had contacted the police in Charleston and Beckley and had undergone a polygraph test in the aftermath, but the results of which never seemed skeptical. Webb's caregiver cautioned that his memory was unreliable due to dementia, suggesting that his recollection of events may be flawed. And Webb kept asserting that he loved Susan and Alex deeply, expressing remorse over not being able to find them despite his efforts. Despite his assertions of innocence, suspicions continued to mount against Webb, with investigators scrutinizing his every word and action in the hope of uncovering the truth. As the investigation drew closer to the truth, the FBI decided to increase the reward for information, raising it from $10,000 to $20,000. However, some wondered if this gesture was too little too late. And so, state police made a significant announcement declaring that Susan was no longer suspected of kidnapping Alex. Tony Rossa of the FBI admitted that mistakes had been made in the investigation at the outset and that they were looking into why signs had been missed. Meanwhile, Rick expressed his frustration with the Wyoming County Sheriff's Department's handling of the case. He believed that if they'd taken his concerns seriously from the beginning, Alex would still have been alive today. Despite his pleas, they initially dismissed Alex's disappearance, insisting she was with her mother. Nevertheless, with Susan being declared not a suspect in the kidnapping case, after 23 long years, the case had finally reached a critical juncture. The focus now shifted to locating the bodies of Alex and Susan. In October 2023, 2 months after the last search warrant, it was determined that Alex had been murdered in her room at Webb's Kyle Lane home. Webb, now in his 80s, was indicted on October 24, 2023 with murder charges for the disappearance of Susan and Alex Carter. Ben Hatfield, the Raleigh County prosecuting attorney, expressed confidence in the case against Webb. Despite Webb's declining health and the legal challenges involved in his arrest, Hatfield was determined to pursue justice for Alex and Susan. Due to Webb's deteriorating health and the legal hurdles associated with obtaining medical clearance for his arrest, his incarceration was delayed until April 2024. The grand jury was presented with the evidence and an indictment was requested. The delays continued for a while, despite efforts to expedite the process, including visits to nursing homes where Webb stayed. However, it was during one of these visits that a breakthrough in the case occurred. On April 24, 2024, Special Investigator Jeff Schote and retired Chief of Detectives from the Beckley City Police Department visited the Hilltop Nursing Home where Webb was residing before a court date. During their conversation, Webb gave a detailed and unequivocal confession. He admitted to shooting Susan Carter after suspecting her of taking cash from his home. The argument that followed led to her death. Webb then confessed to shooting Alex for eliminating the sole witness. According to Webb's confession, he stored the bodies in the basement of his home overnight before burying them in a shallow grave in the woods on his property over the next 2 nights. He buried them together, clad in their clothes. Webb's confession provided closure to a case that had haunted investigators in the community for over 2 decades. Despite the challenges faced along the way, the relentless pursuit of justice ultimately prevailed. The confession served as a crucial piece of evidence, shedding light on the events that led to the untimely deaths of Susan and Alex Carter and bringing some semblance of closure to their grieving loved ones, especially Rick, who'd been waiting to know what happened to his daughter for nearly 2 long decades. With the confession finally received, law enforcement officers were determined to bring little Alex back home to her father and find closure for the grieving family. However, Webb's deteriorating health and memory hindered the search efforts. Despite his attempts to guide them to the burial site, Webb was unable to provide an exact location. In a display of unwavering commitment, neighbors Grant and Tammy Newhouse, owners of New Horizons Landscaping, volunteered their time and equipment to assist with the excavation. They tirelessly combed through Webb's backyard, row by row, until their efforts were rewarded. And on April 11, 2024, after 2 days of exhaustive searching, the bodies of Alex and Susan Carter were finally discovered. The moment was bittersweet, marking the end of a 24-year-long search for closure. Tragically, just hours before the discovery, Webb passed away in prison, escaping the full consequences of his heinous actions. Webb, who was incarcerated at Mount Olive, West Virginia, suffered what police are calling a medical episode. Webb was later pronounced dead at Montgomery General Hospital. According to a press release provided by Captain R.A. Maddy of the West Virginia State Police, Webb's medical emergency began at approximately 10:30 in the morning of April 11, 2024, just a few hours after the remains were found in his own backyard. For Rick, Alex's father, the discovery brought a mixture of emotions. Relief that his daughter had been found, yet profound sadness at the circumstances of her death. His unwavering belief that one day she would come home had finally been realized, albeit in the most devastating way possible. As the case comes to a close, there is a glimmer of hope that the Carters can find some semblance of peace, knowing that Alex and her mother can finally be laid to rest. On April 11, 1968, 47-year-old Hiram Ross Graham, a decorated soldier from World War II, set out on his regular route as a milkman, but did not return home. A missing persons report was filed by the milk company in the evening when Graham's truck didn't return, long after his route was supposed to have been covered. After a thorough search failed to find him, the man was located the next day with the help of an aerial search deep in the woods of Vero Beach, Florida. Hiram Graham was lying dead next to his milk truck in the woods, shot 3 times, execution style. The veteran was slain days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., which raised the possibility of its connection with violence over racial tensions. Who could have wanted the execution of a beloved milkman in the neighborhood? Was this a personal act of revenge, or did it have things to do with race or robbery? These questions remained unanswered for over half a century, finally finding resolution in 2024. Towards the end of World War II, the U.S. Army fought the Battle of the Bulge on the Western Front against Germany that helped turn the tide of the war, and among the heat of the battle was Hiram Ross Graham. Graham received the Purple Heart Medal from the president, given to the soldiers who sacrificed themselves greatly on the battleground. Graham later served as a chairman of band associations and commander of disabled American veterans. In the 1960s, Graham moved to Vero Beach, Florida with his family and started working as a milk salesman for the Borden Milk Company. Besides being a milk salesman, he was also the commander of the Civil Air Patrol for the district. The veteran-turned-warm-hearted milkman was loved by the consumers for his amiable nature, and he even used to chip in for the buyers who couldn't afford milk on any particular day. Hiram Graham and his wife Doris were parents of 2 boys and a girl. Graham was living the full life of pride in the scenic city of Vero Beach, but he couldn't have expected that all would end so suddenly. As he followed his usual delivery route on the Thursday morning of April 11th, 1968, Graham was in the neighborhood of Gifford when he was seen engaged in a conversation by a local girl. That very moment became the last time he was seen alive. Graham didn't return home after a shift that day. Concerns began to rise when he didn't return the truck to the Ford Pierce office of the Borden Milk Company after covering his delivery route in Gifford. The Indian River County Sheriff's Office was alerted, and they began a local search in the areas around Graham's route, but he was nowhere to be found. As the concerns mounted the following day, a plane was arranged for an aerial search of the city and its forested areas. Officers spotted a chilling scene from the air when they flew across a wooded section between the North and South Gifford roads. Deep in the woods, a milk truck was spotted with a man lying next to it. When they located the scene, their worst fears were confirmed. It was Graham, shot 3 times, execution style. An autopsy report revealed the bullets were shot from a low-caliber weapon. There was also about $70 or $80 missing from the truck. When the locals along his route in Gifford were interviewed, officers learned about the girl who saw Graham lastly. She stated that she approached the milkman's truck and saw him engaged in a conversation with 2 African-American men. Graham told the girl he'd be back soon, and the 3 of them drove away in Graham's truck. After that, locals had heard a few shots being fired. A police description of the case said that an early 1950s model Chevrolet, occupied by 2 unknown males, was seen leaving the area at high speed minutes after the shots were heard. The 2 African-American males who were seen hopping into Graham's milk truck were carrying guns, as per the statement of the girl who saw them. Did Graham know them personally, or did they threaten Graham for some unknown reason? The mystery remained as to why and how they managed to hop into Graham's truck. Both of them, however, remained unidentified. Despite the authorities' best efforts, the killers were successful in eluding them. One of Graham's sons, Larry Edwin Graham, who was just 16 at the time, was given the news about his father's death by the sheriff's officers. On April 15, 1968, Hiram was buried in Crestlawn Cemetery after a military farewell service. Over the next 6 years, several efforts were made, and over 15 investigations occurred through the county in order to generate leads on the offenders. But none of the leads panned out. The murder of the veteran soldier went cold for good. 38 years passed, and the grisly incident of Graham's homicide was long forgotten. In 2006, Graham's son Larry came forward to raise a voice for his father's case. Larry Graham and the family, while doing an open interview with a local media outlet, accused a man named Thomas Williams from Indian River County for committing the murder of Hiram Graham. Larry stated the family had been positive about the potential involvement of this individual, though the reasoning behind this was never revealed. This was the first time in 38 years that the case showed some signs of life, and seeing this, the sheriff's office decided to reopen it. But before the department could examine the accusation and learn more about this individual, Thomas Williams, who lived in Indian River County itself, Williams himself wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper. He complained that his name had been wrongfully accused in a random case, and he didn't possess any knowledge about the matter. He denied any involvement in the case and warned the newspaper not to dishonor his name. The investigation lost momentum due to this and went dormant once again. The cold case attracted its first clues years later when, in 2022, a lead reached Indian River County authorities from an unexpected source. The lead came from within the county jail itself. An inmate, whose identity wasn't revealed, but who was related to Thomas J. Williams, stated that Williams had confessed to him about murdering the milkman in the past. This inmate told the detectives that Thomas Williams was a very dangerous man and had been arrested and convicted many times for numerous other felonies. Detectives wanted rock-solid confirmation for this statement, so they searched for more people related to Thomas Williams. After interviewing some of them, they tracked down a woman from Miami in 2023 who was married to Williams in the past before they got divorced. She also chose to remain anonymous, but was able to provide the authorities with the final piece of information they needed. She testified that Williams had admitted to her too about shooting the milkman dead in the past. The detectives now had two separate testimonies, as both these witnesses had never met each other, and neither of them had any knowledge of the other's statement. Although the department now had more than enough evidence to convict the accused, Thomas Williams had died a natural death in 2016. Sheriff Eric Flowers said that both the witnesses came forward only because Thomas Williams was deceased. When alive, witnesses admitted he was a dangerous individual who was a threat to them and their families. Both the witnesses told the police in their separate statements that the death of Williams had given them the courage to come forward, as he was no longer a threat then.
These folks said, I would have never said anything to you before. As long as he was alive, he was a threat to me and my family. We would have never told you. But the fact that he is now dead gave them the courage to come forward.
Larry stated that the killing of his father came at a time when racial tensions were high due to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He thinks that his father may have become a target in the predominantly African-American residential area of Gifford. But Sheriff Flowers denied the claims and firmly stated that robbery was the motive of the killers. The Borden Milk Company confirmed after Graham's death that about $70 to $80 was missing from the truck. About the second partner who accompanied Thomas Williams in the homicide, Sheriff Flowers said that they had an idea about who it could be, but needed confirmation from more witnesses. He's encouraged anyone with knowledge about the case to come forward and contact the Indian River County Sheriff's Office. In April 2024, Thomas J. Williams was convicted for the murder of Hiram Graham. In the press conference, Larry Graham remembered the courageous life led by his father and the long wait his family had to endure. The Graham family finally had their closure after 56 years, and the soldier-spirited Hiram Graham rested in peace as a war hero. On November 27, 1988, a simple missed phone call led to a chilling discovery. Robert Hecht never missed his weekly Sunday call with his out-of-state sister, but on that Sunday, silence hung heavy on the line. Worried, his sister contacted the authorities for a welfare check at his Rio Togas Road residence in Punta Gorda, Florida. 2 days later, on November 29th, their worst fears were confirmed. 58-year-old Robert was found lifeless in his home, mercilessly murdered. This quiet day had transformed into a horrifying scene. They investigated the case for a long time. Unfortunately, the case went cold for 3 decades. But just when hope dimmed, there was news again. What evidence could detectives have found after 30 years? And more importantly, who was responsible for this murder? Before we get into the future, let's revisit the grim scene. Investigators noticed that the scene itself painted a grim picture. Robert lay lifeless on the couch, and there was a heavy glass ashtray next to him, covered in blood.
And he had been murdered by the use of an ashtray, a big heavy ashtray that was found in the house.
He'd been struck in the head several times. It was clear that the ashtray was the murder weapon, but there was no signs of a fight. This meant Robert was likely surprised or attacked from behind. He also appeared to have been dead for a couple of days, and the police estimated the date of his death to be the 27th, the day he missed his sister's call. Apart from the weapon, the police found another clue at the crime scene.
On the back of his leg was a burnt matchstick and a cigarette butt on the floor.
A single cigarette butt with potentially big implications. But there was something even more concerning. Robert's brand new Lincoln Town car was missing. It had vanished without a trace and added yet another layer of mystery to this already confusing case. As investigators dug deeper, they tried to trace Robert's movements before the murder. Witnesses claimed to have seen him on the evening of November 26, 1988, just a day before his death. But there was a new face by his side, a man named Ray. Described as a white male with a southern accent, he was an unfamiliar figure to those who knew Robert. The details about Ray were also sketchy at best. Ray claimed to be from Tennessee and Kentucky and had supposedly separated from his wife and was living with his 14-year-old daughter. So who could he be? The more they thought about it, the stranger this encounter seemed. Could he have played a part in Robert's final hours? Investigators pinned down Robert's last confirmed movements. He was seen with Ray at the Fisherman's Village Oyster Bar in Punta Gorda on the evening of the 26th. Robert had even mentioned plans to visit another bar with Ray before heading home. This established a clearer timeline and locations for Robert's final hours, but Ray remained a ghost. His identity was the biggest obstacle in the case. The search for answers went beyond Charlotte County. Then, a crucial breakthrough arrived. The police learned that on November 28, 1988, in a town called Lenoir, a man was spotted leaving a store and ditching Robert's stolen car, the Lincoln he'd just bought a month earlier. It had been left abandoned on Main Street in Lenoir, North Carolina, over 700 miles from Punta Gorda. This unexpected discovery not only confirmed the theft of the car, but also suggested a potential escape route for the perpetrator. The car, now in the hands of the Lenoir police, became a key piece of evidence that could hold some important clues. Following the lead of the recovered Lincoln, crime scene investigators conducted a meticulous examination of the vehicle. Their search yielded an important piece of evidence: a single cigarette butt. This discovery was particularly interesting because during their prior investigation of Robert's home, they'd found another cigarette butt near the body. But the one in the stolen car was presumed to belong to the person responsible for the murder. The cigarette butts in his car were a significant find because Robert had a strict rule of no smoking in his car. He never smoked in it himself or allowed anyone else to do so, and this suggested that the cigarette likely wasn't from Robert, but rather a potential breadcrumb left behind by the killer. The investigation was about to take another turn just as detectives were digging deeper into the lead of the stolen Lincoln. A new witness came forward, claiming they saw a blonde woman in the passenger seat of the stolen car. This threw the whole investigation for a loop. Who was this woman? Was the blonde woman a random passenger or something more? Detectives tirelessly interviewed witnesses, searching for any inconsistencies that might lead them to the truth. As days turned into weeks, pressure grew from the media, but the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office stayed silent. The lack of motive, the mysterious Ray, and the surprising blonde woman all started to look like a planned crime gone wrong. Grief gripped Robert's family as their Sunday ritual turned into a chilling silence. With no new leads to chase and the well of clues running dry, the case eventually turned cold. Yet a question haunted the investigation. Would they ever find Robert's killer? Years passed with the Robert Hecht case lying cold, but hope was reignited in September 2021. Determined to crack the decades-old mystery, Charlotte County cold case detectives re-examined every detail. Witness interviews were prioritized, particularly those focusing on the elusive Ray. While details about Ray's claimed background emerged during the initial investigation, such as him being from Tennessee and Kentucky and separated with a daughter, limitations in technology at the time hindered progress in the investigation. This seemingly normal information wasn't enough to narrow down the suspect pool, but it held the key to unlocking the truth in 2021. With advancements in DNA technology, the cold case detectives saw renewed hope. In September 2021, the evidence was reevaluated. Both cigarette butts were submitted for DNA analysis. And to the detective's surprise, something new was found. DNA from the same person was present on both cigarettes. This discovery was monumental. It confirmed that the person who attacked Robert in his home and stole his car was the same person who smoked the cigarette found inside the vehicle. But a crucial element remained missing: a name for this DNA profile. The detectives, with renewed determination, searched the Combined DNA Index System, a national database for DNA profiles, but their search yielded no results. This meant the perpetrator wasn't linked to any previous criminal activity. Then they took the investigation a step further by submitting the results for genealogical examination. This innovative technique uses DNA to trace an individual's ancestry, potentially leading to matches with relatives within a database. It was a risk, but it offered a path forward where traditional methods had failed. But the risk paid off. A match was discovered, a family member from Tennessee. Now, with a geographical connection established, detectives conducted interviews, studied family trees, and made direct comparisons with family members. This process, along with what they knew about the 14-year-old daughter mentioned by Ray, finally led them to the man they'd been searching for, Kenneth Ray Miller, who was just 36 when Robert Hecht was murdered. The revelation of Ray Miller's name sent shockwaves through the investigation. Witness interviews were conducted once again, this time with photographs of Ray in hand. The results were chilling. Those who'd previously encountered Ray on that fateful evening of November 26, 1988, positively identified him from the photographs. The identification wasn't the only bombshell dropped by the witnesses. After seeing Ray's image, one witness offered a startling detail. They'd not only seen Ray with Robert on the evening of November 26, but also spotted him in Robert's home the very next morning, November 27th. This proved that Ray wasn't just an acquaintance. He appeared to be comfortable enough to spend the night at Robert's residence. The witness described seeing him draped on the end of the living room couch, the same couch where Robert's lifeless body was later found. However, a cruel twist of fate emerged. When detectives looked deeper into Kenneth Ray Miller, they found that he'd passed away in 2007 at the age of 55 of natural causes, taking his secrets to the grave. While the identification brought a sense of closure, it also left a void, the unanswered questions surrounding Robert's final moments and the motive behind the attack. Despite this setback, the investigation continued, and a background check on Ray revealed a disturbing truth: a past filled with violent crimes. Aggravated battery, burglary, arson, these were just a few of the offenses that were part of his history. This violent streak painted a chilling portrait of the man who had spent his final hours with Robert. On March 22, 2024, after a relentless pursuit of justice spanning over 3 decades, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit officially closed the case. This closure, however, was bittersweet, with the blonde woman not being found and the killer not alive to face justice. It was a closure by the death of the offender, a sad reminder that Ray would never face the consequences of his actions. The case of Robert Hecht stands as a testament of the enduring power of investigative work. Even after decades, advancements in technology and the relentless pursuit of truth can bring closure to families yearning for answers. Though the mystery may not be fully solved, the identification of Kenneth Ray Miller ensures that Robert Hecht's family has some peace. March 8, 1945 marked the unsettling start of the Mary Jane Van Gilder mystery. On the stage, she abruptly requested to be released from her job, setting a series of unanswered questions into motion. At the time, her 5 children resided with their father, her estranged husband, far away in West Virginia. Her last known mailing address pinned her in Willard, Ohio. From then on, silence enveloped her existence. Her children, left in the dark, ultimately reported her missing to the Shelby Police Department in 2018, 73 years after they last heard from their mother. What would have compelled Mary Jane to vanish without a trace? What could have made her children wait until 73 years before filing a report to the police? Mary Jane Croft Van Gilder's life, filled with complexities and marked by the echoes of rural American struggles, began in Montana, West Virginia. Born on November 19, 1911, she was the 4th child in a large family of 8 children belonging to John and Anna Croft. By 1920, her family resided in the Winfield district of Marion County, about 10 miles from Fairmont. Her father, John, was a hardworking man, juggling roles as a farmer and a coal miner, reflecting the rugged life of many during that era. On January 29, 1929, a young Mary Jane married James Wesley Van Gilder. They lived in the same Winfield district where she grew up. Over the next several years, their family grew rapidly. Their first child, Anna, was born on March 19, 1931. By 1940, Mary Jane and James had expanded their family to include 7 children, although 2, twins Alan and Alice, tragically didn't survive childbirth in 1935. The Van Gilders lived on Prickett's Creek, on land owned by the Van Gilder family. Despite the public strides being made, private life at the Van Gilder household was fraught with difficulties. Family members hinted at a turbulent atmosphere, largely due to James's struggles with alcoholism. This tension took its toll on their marriage, and by 1943, Mary Jane sought a reprieve. She moved into Fairmont, leaving James and the children behind, and found solace in an apartment above the old Fairmont Theater. Mary Jane then reached out to James after her move, proposing that he and the children join her in Fairmont for a new start. James, however, rejected this proposal. By 1943, as the U.S. deepened its involvement in World War II, a booming demand for wartime labor led to significant shifts in the workforce. During this time, the U.S. Army Air Force unveiled plans for a new aircraft supply depot outside Shelby, Ohio, offering numerous job opportunities. Mary Jane Van Gilder seized this chance and moved from West Virginia to Plymouth, Ohio, late in 1943 or early 1944, drawn by both the need to support her family and contribute to the war effort. In Ohio, Mary Jane moved frequently, but stayed near Shelby. Her last known address before her disappearance was 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard, Ohio, close to the Army Air Force Depot. She relocated there before March 8, 1945, under circumstances that remain unclear. Throughout her time in Ohio, Mary Jane maintained contact with her family, particularly her eldest daughter Anna, who was by then 14 years old. Despite the physical and possibly emotional distance, she supported her children by sending money, clothing, and war bonds back to West Virginia. However, early in 1945, a peculiar request was made. Mary Jane asked Anna to return the war bonds she'd sent. Anna complied, although she was confused by her mother's sudden change in routine. Strangely, within a month of this unusual request, Anna received another letter from her mother, which included yet another $25 war bond. This correspondence, puzzling in its timing and content, marked the last known contact Mary Jane Van Gilder had with any of her children or other family members. After this, Mary Jane Van Gilder's presence faded from the records. Her life and whereabouts dissolved into a mystery that would perplex her family and investigators for decades. In early 1945, Mary Jane Van Gilder made a decisive move that seemed to signal a desire for a new beginning. On February 12, 1945, she formally filed a petition for divorce from her husband, James, in the Chancery Records of Huron County, Ohio. The petition, somewhat obscured by smudged ink, accused James of extreme cruelty and gross neglect of duty. Just weeks later, on March 8, 1945, Mary Jane resigned from her job at the Shelby Army Air Force Depot, citing the need to address added household duties. The ambiguity of this phrase left enough room for speculation. Was she planning to take her children and start anew, or were other pressures weighing on her? Back in West Virginia, by late 1945, James Wesley Van Gilder also sought to legally end their marriage. He filed for divorce in Marion County Circuit Court before November 23, 1945. On November 26, a divorce commissioner granted his request and awarded him custody of their 5 children, describing him as the proper person to have their care. The trajectory of Mary Jane's life took a mysterious turn after these events. Her initial petition for divorce was never resolved in her favor. Instead, it was dismissed on April 4, 1946, at her own cost and request. By May 25, 1946, any remaining court costs were deducted from a deposit she'd previously made. This notation marked the last official record of Mary Jane Van Gilder's existence. Nearly 4 years after Mary Jane Van Gilder's disappearance, her daughter Anna, driven by increasing curiosity and concern for her mother's well-being, reached out to a towering figure of law enforcement in the country, Director John Edgar Hoover of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The initial correspondence between Anna and Director Hoover from late 1949 was lost, but a follow-up letter from Anna, dated January 3, 1950, indicated that the FBI responded promptly. They provided Anna with the last known address of Mary Jane at 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard, Ohio. However, Anna's letter to this address was returned, marked not at this address. Over the ensuing years, Anna maintained intermittent correspondence with Director Hoover and other officials. Unfortunately, the original letters in the FBI files had deteriorated over time and were difficult to decipher by then. This collection of letters, notes, and a single photograph chronicled Anna's early and increasingly urgent attempts to locate her mother. They had provided investigators with many important clues about Mary Jane's life and disappearance. Despite the FBI's assistance in providing Mary Jane's last known address and formally opening a missing persons file, Director Hoover had to inform Anna repeatedly that the FBI had no jurisdiction to independently investigate the case. He advised Anna to stay in touch with local law enforcement for further action. Following Hoover's advice, Anna reached out to the sheriff of Marion County, West Virginia, who in turn contacted the chief of police in Plymouth, Ohio, as well as the Shelby Army Air Force Depot, the United States Treasury Department, and the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Their collective persistence yielded some results. In 1950, Anna still had the last war bond Mary Jane had sent her in early 1945. A letter from that year stated that the bond had been purchased via the payroll deduction system at the Shelby Depot, where Mary Jane worked until March 8, 1945. Further clues emerged in 1952 from the Shelby Depot, now renamed the Wilkins Air Force Specialized Depot. A letter dated May 20, 1952, from United States Air Force First Lieutenant Edwin Seltzer to Anna clarified that Mary Jane had indeed left her employment at the depot on March 8, 1945, citing added household duties. Seltzer also confirmed her address during her time in Ohio, including her residence at No. 2 Truck Street in Plymouth, and prior to that at 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard. Despite accumulating significant information, Anna hit a brick wall in her investigation by 1952. Her frustration was evident in a poignant letter dated November 25, 1953, to Director Hoover, expressing her desperation to at least hear from her mother, if not meet her. Director Hoover's reply reiterated the limitations of the FBI's role in her case. Decades later, a newspaper article in 2004 revived interest in Mary Jane's case. The article led to new testimonies, including one from Mr. William H. King of Willard, Ohio, who remembered Mary Jane from his childhood. King's recollections provided a vivid glimpse into Mary Jane's life during her time in Plymouth, but offered no clues about her fate after the war. Sergeant Tom Hines of the Plymouth Police Department also responded to the article, expressing a willingness to assist, albeit with realistic expectations about the challenges of such a cold case. Unfortunately, no substantial leads emerged from these renewed efforts, and no official missing persons case was opened for Mary Jane. For several years, the case went cold. However, in October of 2018, a new breakthrough occurred in the long unsolved case of Mary Jane Croft Van Gilder, who had been missing since 1945. Her granddaughter, Mindy Wilson, approached the Shelby Police Department, compelling them to open the case officially. Shelby Police Detective Adam Turner, the officer in charge, announced that they generated an extensive file on Mary Jane with 107 supplemental reports contributing thousands of pages of investigation. Turner delved into Mary Jane's past during a press conference, detailing her life prior to her disappearance. Despite extensive searches, Turner found no previous investigations or mentions of Mary Jane in their police records. The breakthrough in the investigation came when Turner accessed Mary Jane's military file, which had been presumed destroyed. This file included her social security number, but tracking it revealed no activity post-1945. Yet Turner was persistent, analyzing every detail within the military files, which led to a crucial discovery. A page from her military file mentioned Percy L. Sebren, who had trained Mary Jane at the depot. Intriguingly, Percy later married a woman named Mary J. Sebren, who shared Mary Jane's birth date. Percy and Mary J. Sebren had children shortly after Mary Jane disappeared, suggesting why she might have cited additional household duties as a reason for resignation. Using Ancestry.com and other resources, Turner traced Percy Sebren Jr., one of their children, and contacted his family. Comparisons of photographs and signatures between Mary Jane Van Gilder and Mary J. Sebren, along with a DNA test performed in December 2023, conclusively proved that Mary J. Sebren was indeed Mary Jane Van Gilder. In 2024, a significant press conference was held at the North Central State College Kehoe Center in Shelby, Ohio, where Detective Adam Turner of the Shelby Police Department announced the resolution of the Mary Jane Van Gilder disappearance case, which had remained unsolved since 1945. After decades of mystery, the discovery that Mary J. Sebren was indeed Mary Jane Van Gilder brought mixed emotions to both her original and new families. Mary Sebren, a granddaughter, revealed that Mary J. had hinted at secrets she couldn't disclose before she passed away in 1990 from colon cancer. This left her family grappling with the reality of her hidden past and identity. The news was especially hard on Mary Jane's original children and grandchildren, who had missed and searched for her for 79 years, never understanding why she left. Wilson, speaking on behalf of Mary Jane's first family, expressed a profound mix of relief and sorrow at the closure of the case.
When Adam called me and told me the day we found out, we cried, both of us. Just couldn't believe it. We just kept saying over and over, it's over, it's over.
On June 30th, 1989, A routine day in the quiet town of Seymour, Missouri turned sinister when 24-year-old Kelly Workman vanished without a trace. The church cemetery she'd been mowing sat abandoned, with only half of the task completed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, her absence stretched from minutes to hours, leading to a desperate search by her worried family and local authorities. Days passed with no leads until a chilling discovery was made a week later on July 7, 1989, miles away from where Kelly was last seen. In the murky depths of a creek near Mark Twain National Forest, her decaying body was found. The questions were, what exactly happened to Kelly, and who could have committed such a heinous act? Who would have guessed that it would take 35 long years to find those answers? On that fateful Friday afternoon of June 30th, 1989, around 3:30 p.m., Kelly Workman went to the Pleasant Ridge Baptist Church Cemetery to complete her regular chore of mowing its lawn after working her shift at a local store in the nearby community of Dogwood. But by 5 p.m., the sky opened up and rain forced her to go home. After changing her blouse and tending to the cattle, she returned to finish her work. She was also seen by her uncle at around 6:30 p.m. at the cemetery near the intersection of Missouri Highway 14 and Highway Z, just 1.5 miles from her home. Earlier that day, Kelly was her usual responsible self, ensuring everything at home was in order before heading out. Kelly was born on September 22, 1964, in Dogwood, Missouri. She lived with her parents and was responsible and always got home on time. But that day, hours passed, but Kelly was nowhere to be seen. Later that night, her parents made a chilling discovery. Kelly's mower had been left abandoned in the church lot, and the lawn seemed barely touched. Her car was found sitting in the gravel drive with the keys still in the ignition. The community, confused and shocked, rallied together and formed search parties to find her. Given that she'd been tending to the cemetery without fail for 3 years already, her sudden disappearance appeared very unlikely. The following day, even more help arrived, with firefighters and a helicopter joining the search efforts. But the worst news came about a week later, on July 7th, 1989. A farmer and his son stumbled upon a heartbreaking sight: a fully clothed, decomposing body submerged in water from the waist down. It was discovered about 10 miles away from the Baptist church in a creek near Mark Twain National Forest in Christian County. Police went to the scene and were horrified to find that the body was in such a state that they could only identify it through dental records. And when the results of the test came in, they confirmed that it was indeed Kelly. She'd become a victim of a terrible crime, but the cause of her death remained a mystery. Despite thorough inspection, the autopsy couldn't determine if she'd been strangled or suffocated. They couldn't even determine if she'd been sexually assaulted. They concluded that she hadn't been, since she'd been found fully clothed. However, this reasoning didn't seem right to the people of the community or the family. Sadness and shock spread through the town. They wondered, how could something so terrible happen to someone so kind and quiet? The investigation into her death began, but physical leads were scarce, which left authorities puzzled. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Kelly's family held on to hope and even offered a substantial reward of $10,000 for any information which led to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for her death. But days turned into weeks, and the truth remained elusive. Then a glimmer of hope appeared about 6 months after her murder, when Kelly's mother, Joan Workman, received a chilling call. An anonymous caller phoned their home on the 30th of December 1989 and dropped a hint about seeing someone at the Workman house on the day of the incident. Joan couldn't shake the feeling that Kelly might have known her abductor and killer, considering her cautious nature around strangers, especially men. In August 1990, the police saw a breakthrough. They found their first suspect, Leonard Dwight Banks from Seymour.
So when did you first know that Kelly and Workman had disappeared?
11 o'clock that night.
And what happened then?
State trooper and sheriff over there pulled me over and asked me what I had done with her.
That was the first question?
Yes.
Police requested Banks to undergo a polygraph test regarding Kelly's murder, which he agreed to take. The examiner posed 3 crucial questions, and Banks denied any involvement. The results appeared to clear his name, and this sent investigators back to square one, grappling with the reality that Kelly's killer still roamed free. As the years passed after Kellyanne Workman's tragic disappearance and death, her family remained haunted by unanswered questions. Pam Workman, Kelly's sister, couldn't shake the feeling that Kelly may have stumbled upon something dangerous, perhaps drug or illicit money, during her time at the cemetery where she worked. Or maybe she'd overheard something at the dogwood store that she wasn't supposed to know. Kelly had worked there for just a couple of weekends before her abduction, which added to the mystery surrounding her demise. Then, in July 1996, the spotlight turned to two brothers from Seymour in their 30s, Bobby Banks and Dwight Banks, who were previously cleared as suspects in 1990. Bobby had reportedly failed his polygraph test back in 1990, yet had no charges against him. Dwight was an alcoholic, smoked marijuana, and was also famous for multiple petty crimes in the area, which is why police questioned them directly about what they did with Kellyanne. Dwight admitted to seeing Kelly just hours before her abduction at the dogwood store where she worked. However, he actively denied any involvement in her murder and claimed that he and Bobby were at home eating fried chicken at the time of Kelly's disappearance.
For me to be cleared and for Kellyanne's murderers to be tested and convicted of this, that's what I want.
Reports from 1990 surfaced suggesting that Dwight may have taken drugs before passing a polygraph examination. Despite their protests of innocence, suspicions swirled around the Banks brothers. This left investigators confused, with yet another layer of mystery to peel away in the quest for Kelly's justice. On June 9, 1999, a significant development occurred in the investigation. The detectives received warrants to perform DNA testing on Dwight Banks and Wiley Belt, another suspect they'd zeroed in on, in the hopes of connecting them to the case. Despite these warrants, the lab results were never made public, and neither Banks nor Belt faced arrest or charges. In August 1999, Wiley Belt, in an interview with The Citizen, expressed his willingness to cooperate with DNA testing in connection with Kelly's murder. He, just like Banks, admitted to seeing her on the day she was abducted at the dogwood store, shedding light on his potential involvement in the case. But these DNA tests came out clear and left the police with nothing but another dead end. On June 16, 1999, Dwight Banks consented to a 15-question interview with Fred Spriggs of the Webster County Citizen. During the interview, Banks made a statement expressing his frustration and desire for closure. He said, "It's time to leave me alone or convict me." Then, on September 10, 1999, new Douglas County Sheriff Gary Coop administered a voice stress test to Banks, which is a technique that analyzes shakiness or nervousness in their voice. The idea is that lying makes people stressed, and that stress shows up in how they talk. They probed him about Kelly's disappearance and death. Following the test, Coop reassured Banks and stated that he believed in Banks' innocence. Despite these assurances, the cloud of suspicion continued to loom over Banks. As the years passed, the search for justice in Kelly Workman's case seemed to hit one roadblock after another. On the eve of the 11-year anniversary of Kelly's death in June 2000, her mother, Joan Workman, voiced the family's growing frustration at the lack of progress in the investigation. In July 2000, Michelle Abriel, Kelly's cousin from Seymour, came forward with a startling claim in an interview. She claimed to know the identity of Kelly's killer. It was Dwight Banks. This person aligned with the suspicions of both Joan Workman and Christian County Sheriff Steve Whitney. However, Whitney reportedly informed that Dwight Banks, who was previously considered a suspect, was not responsible for Kelly's murder. The case went cold again. Fast forward to July 1st, 2009, the 20-year anniversary of Kelly's abduction and murder. Despite the passage of time, the sheriff's departments in Christian and Douglas counties stated that they had no new leads to report, but they never lost hope of solving it someday. Then, on May 22, 2013, Professor Michael Bowersox, a former prison warden turned forensics professor, offered a glimmer of hope. His class at Drury University conducted a study on Kelly's murder. With the study, they concluded that exhuming her body and reopening the investigation could lead to the resolution of the case and the prosecution of the perpetrators. Most importantly, the report also highlighted alleged negligence in evidence collection and investigative procedures by former officials, which suggested that the case could have been solved years ago in 1989 itself if proper protocols had been followed. Despite the setbacks and missed opportunities, the quest for justice for Kelly Workman continued, fueled by the hope that one day the truth would finally come to light. The investigation seemed stuck, and people were losing faith. They worried it would become yet another one of those cases that everyone remembers, not for who did it, but because it never got solved. The weight of this fear pressed heavily on Kelly's family. Would she ever get the justice she deserved? In a stunning turn of events, after over 30 years, a long-awaited breakthrough finally emerged in the decades-old case of Kellyanne Workman's murder. On February 20th, 2024, a significant development unfolded in the decades-old case of Kellyanne Workman's murder. A Douglas County grand jury indicted 3 men, Bobby Banks, Leonard Dwight Banks, and Wiley Belt, for her 1989 murder. The arrest came after new information surfaced linking the suspects to Kelly's killing, but it was never disclosed to the public. The prosecuting attorney, Matt Weatherman, revealed that a tipster, who was not previously considered a person of interest in the case, provided crucial information in the last couple of months. Further details haven't yet been revealed by the authorities. The charges against the 3 men include first-degree murder, first-degree and first-degree kidnapping in connection with Kelly's abduction and subsequent death. Following their arrest, the Banks brothers and Wiley Belt were taken into custody and held at the Douglas County Jail in Ava, Missouri. Each of them is being held on $250,000 cash bond. The community now awaits further developments in the legal proceedings, hopeful that the perpetrators will be brought to justice for their heinous crimes after 35 years. The long-awaited sentencing will hopefully bring closure to Kelly's family and provide some semblance of peace after years of anguish and uncertainty. On February 27, 2024, the quiet coastal city of Ormond Beach, Florida, known for its pristine beaches and outdoor fun, faced a shocking event. Under a house on the 1300 block of Hand Avenue, authorities discovered a buried body. Initially, the identity was unknown, but forensics soon indicated it could be Autumn Lane McClure, a girl who was missing for the past 20 years since May 10, 2004. After DNA confirmation from her family, it was clear the remains were indeed Autumn's. But the question remains, what led the police to this grim find? And what really happened to Autumn Lane McClure? What kept this case hidden for 2 decades? Autumn Lane McClure, born on April 12, 1987 in Ormond Beach, Florida, was a bright and outgoing teenager who attended Mainland High School. Her charisma shone through in her active participation in various school events, and she was often seen cheering with her classmates during school functions. Despite her vivacity, details about her family life remain scarce, and much about her personal background is shrouded in mystery. At the age of 16, Autumn started working part-time at Winn-Dixie, a well-known supermarket chain in Jacksonville, Florida. During this period, she lived with her grandmother, who provided a seemingly stable home environment. However, life is not without its challenges. One day, after a disagreement with her grandmother, the specifics of which remain unclear, Autumn made the decision to leave. Feeling unsettled and seeking support, she turned to her colleagues at Winn-Dixie. While initially no one could provide the help she sought, eventually a couple who also worked at Winn-Dixie had stepped in. Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly, who lived in a trailer at the Sandy O's mobile home park in Ormond Beach, had offered Autumn a place to stay. Seeing this as a beneficial arrangement, Autumn moved in with them, hopeful for a new beginning. Yet, what seemed like a generous offer at the time would later become a focal point of numerous troubling questions surrounding her disappearance. Despite Autumn's decision to move out, she kept in touch with her grandmother, who called her daily to check in. But on May 9, 2004, Autumn didn't answer the phone. Her grandmother assumed that she was busy with work and decided not to call again that day. The next day, May 10th, repeated calls to Autumn went unanswered. Growing concerned, her grandmother reported her missing to the police. The police immediately launched an investigation into Autumn's disappearance. They first questioned Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly, the couple she was staying with. The couple said they'd last seen Autumn on May 9th and claimed they had no idea where she was. The police then turned to her grandmother, but unfortunately, she also didn't have any useful information. Following up, the police interviewed Autumn's friends and acquaintances, which led them to her boyfriend, Michael Chelly. He mentioned he'd last seen Autumn on May 10th when he dropped her off at the Volusia Mall in Daytona Beach, Florida. Detectives went to the mall, questioning staff and patrons, but found no clues about Autumn's whereabouts. After a week of investigation, the police still hadn't discovered any significant leads. Later, Autumn's grandmother received peculiar letters, supposedly from Autumn, postmarked from Melbourne, Florida. In those letters, Autumn hinted at plans to return home upon turning 18. Recognizing the potential importance of this information, the police had tried to trace the origin of the letters and gather more intelligence about Autumn's location. Despite their diligent efforts, they couldn't conclusively determine whether the letters were genuinely from Autumn or if someone had fabricated them to mislead the investigation. The investigation into Autumn Lane McClure's disappearance remained tireless. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, no significant breakthroughs surfaced. Hope dwindled among her family and friends as years passed into agonizing silence, and the case eventually grew cold. Despite this, detectives continued their efforts, refusing to surrender to the silence. In a pivotal move, they collected DNA samples from Autumn's relatives and registered her details in the National Missing Children's Database, holding on to a slim thread of hope that someday some information might emerge. 12 years after Autumn vanished, in 2016, a shocking confession rekindled the investigation. Autumn's boyfriend, who had previously claimed he'd dropped her off at Volusia Mall on the day she disappeared, admitted he'd lied. Instead, he revealed that he'd last seen her at Seabreeze Bridge on May 10, 2004, when she got into a car with an unidentified woman. The reasons behind his initial deception were unclear. It was speculated that he might have lied to distance himself from suspicion or any involvement in her disappearance. Spurred by this new lead, the investigation intensified. Authorities conducted extensive interviews and reviewed CCTV footage from around the bridge area. Unfortunately, they found no trace of the mysterious woman mentioned by Autumn's boyfriend. The absence of new evidence and the elusive nature of the case made it exceedingly difficult for the police to make any substantial headway. Once again, despite their best efforts, the case went cold, shrouded in secrecy and frustration. The pieces of the puzzle remained elusive, and the truth about what happened to Autumn Lane McClure continued to evade the grasp of those seeking answers. In 2018, as the case continued to perplex law enforcement in the community, detectives had decided to reconnect with Jessica, who had since moved to Nevada. Initially, she maintained that she had no information about Autumn McClure's whereabouts. However, the case took a dramatic turn in 2022 when Chris Miller, a relative of Brian and Jessica, came forward. He revealed a startling confession from Brian, who had allegedly admitted to killing Autumn and hiding her body in Volusia County. Brian was living with his girlfriend Jessica and Autumn at the time of Autumn's disappearance. They both worked at the same place where Autumn was after she left home, and both agreed to accept Autumn into their home when she had nowhere to stay. This revelation by Chris came too late to bring Brian to justice. He passed away during a medical procedure on May 26, 2022. The news was a massive blow to the investigation, but it had also opened new avenues for inquiry. Shortly after the revelation of Brian's demise, Jessica reached out to the sheriff's office, seeking immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation. Although it was out of the blue for Jessica to ask for immunity, especially when she wasn't the prime suspect, the police went ahead and agreed to her offer, and Jessica began to share crucial information. During the interrogation, which occurred in late 2023, Jessica revealed disturbing details about the sexual relationship between Autumn and Brian. She disclosed that she'd been the one who picked up Autumn from the Seabreeze Bridge on the day of her disappearance and had dropped her off at her home. She also confessed to witnessing a tense moment between Autumn and Brian in the bathroom as he choked her. When she confronted Brian, he threatened her, implying dire consequences if she were to speak of what had transpired. Most crucially, Jessica provided the exact location where Autumn's body was buried, in an area of Ormond Beach. She described how Brian, feeling a grim sense of relief, would visit the burial site, which was eventually built over with a house, to ensure that his deeds remained undiscovered. This breakthrough, while it came many years after Autumn's disappearance, provided some answers to the enduring mystery and offered a semblance of closure to her family and the community. The information also prompted a reevaluation of the evidence and a renewed commitment to ensuring justice for Autumn, even posthumously. When Autumn McClure's body was finally recovered, it marked a somber moment in a long-standing mystery that had perplexed the Ormond Beach community. Sheriff Chitwood reflected on the efforts of the investigative team over the years, expressing a mix of pride and sorrow. Not the result anyone hoped for back in 2004 or at any time since, he said, but I'm very proud of the work that went into this discovery. 20 years later, we can at least say we never gave up on Autumn McClure's case. In his statement, Sheriff Chitwood had also conveyed his condolences to Autumn's family, acknowledging the painful reality that although the case had seen significant progress, the main suspect, Brian Donnelly, had evaded earthly justice since his death in 2022. The sad part is he'll never face the consequences in this world for the evil he perpetrated, Chitwood remarked. He expressed a poignant hope that in his final moments, Brian might have confronted the gravity of his actions. Further details emerged about the motive behind Autumn's death. Jessica, who had provided crucial information leading to the discovery of Autumn's body, suggested that Brian had acted out of fear that Autumn might expose their inappropriate relationship to her family, as she was only 16 at the time, while Brian was 31, potentially leading to serious legal consequences for him. Authorities later concluded that Jessica had no direct involvement in Autumn's demise. Sheriff Chitwood spoke of the closure that finding Autumn's remains could bring to her grieving family.
To the family and say, look, here, at least she can be buried with dignity now, not folded up and shoved in some crawl space.
This statement underscored the department's commitment to restoring dignity to Autumn's memory and providing some measure of peace to her loved ones. Detective McGuire, who had written one of the earliest reports on Autumn's case back in 2004, played a pivotal role in leading the investigation that had ultimately led to the discovery of her remains. Sheriff Chitwood confirmed that Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly were in a relationship and living together based on a journalist question, and he acknowledged the complexities of their interaction with Autumn. The same journalist then asked about the nature of the relationship between Autumn and the couple, to which Sheriff Chitwood replied affirmatively about the relationship, underscoring the difficult circumstances surrounding Autumn's life and disappearance. When questioned about the family's reaction to the developments, Detective McGuire shared his conversation with Autumn's twin brother. He reported that while the family was relieved to finally have some answers, they weren't surprised, as there'd been long-standing rumors hinting at distressing circumstances surrounding her final days. The family had expressed a profound sense of relief that, after all these years, Autumn had finally been found and could be laid to rest with dignity. Sometime in February of 1991, 28-year-old Brenda Condon started a new job as a part-time bartender at Carlsbad Tavern in Spring Township, Pennsylvania. She'd just been working for 2 weeks. On February 26, 1991, she was working a double shift. Brenda's shift was supposed to end at 6 p.m., and that was when the crew members noted her absence. Her gray 1986 Mercury Capri remained in the parking lot, and her cowboy boots were found in the men's restroom, but Brenda was nowhere to be seen. On March 2, 1991, it had become official. Brenda Condon had gone missing. The police endlessly tried to locate 3 suspects who were seen in the bar that night. Days turned into weeks, weeks to months, and soon years began to pass by with no information on Brenda's whereabouts and safety. 32 long years had passed, and a lot had happened, but Brenda's family kept wondering about what might have happened to her. However, in April 2024, a new lead was discovered, and it looks like Brenda's family might finally get their questions answered. What truly happened to Brenda? Will her case finally be closed after 3 decades? And what was this new lead that brought new hope in finding her? Brenda Condon was born on March 1, 1962. She was born and raised in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Clearfield Area High School in 1980 as Brenda Kuhn. The blue-eyed, Caucasian, reddish-brown-haired woman was loved and admired by all who knew her. Brenda was described by her family, friends, and co-workers as kind, friendly, and reliable. Brenda had 2 children with her ex-husband, Thomas L. Condon Jr. She and Thomas used to live in Clearfield, where they raised their children, Shauna and Todd. According to her older sister, Iris Myers, somewhere along Brenda and Thomas's marriage, their love began to run dry, and they eventually drifted apart. Their divorce was amicable, and they didn't have to deal with a custody arrangement. Brenda didn't want to keep her children from their schools, friends, and family, so she decided that Shauna and Todd would live with their father, Thomas. Brenda could always come pick up the children anytime she wanted to spend time with them. Todd also mentioned that his parents spoke over the phone about different things. Their relationship was good and healthy. After the divorce, Brenda had moved to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where she started her own home cleaning service. The informal arrangement between Brenda and Thomas regarding their children continued without any problems. Brenda moved on with her love life when she started seeing Greg Palazzari, and their relationship lasted strong for 2 years. Brenda wanted to be closer to her children, who still lived in Clearview with her ex-husband Thomas, so she decided to move in with her boyfriend Greg, who lived in Harvest Circle State College. This was a few months before the mother of 2 disappeared. So she moved to State College and opened a second branch of her home cleaning service. In February of 1991, she decided to get a second job as a part-time bartender at Carlsbad Tavern, located at 1796 Zion Road in Spring Township. By February 26, 1991, Brenda had been working at the bar for 2 weeks. It was her job to close the bar after the last call, clean up, and then begin her day shift at 10 a.m. the next day. When the day crew came in for work the next morning, Brenda's absence wasn't noticed. The morning shift carried on as normal. Nothing seemed amiss. The bar was clean, the receipts had been put away from the previous night, and the lights were turned off. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery. No one noticed that Barbara wasn't at work. The day shift ended at 6 p.m., and her coworkers finally noticed that they hadn't seen her all day. Her car was in the parking lot, and her shoes were neatly placed in the men's bathroom, but her car keys and purse weren't found. Her coworkers tried to remember the last they'd actually seen her, and they narrowed it down to 12:45 p.m. to 1:15 a.m. on February 27th. She was last seen talking to an unknown man inside the bar. Brenda was reported missing that evening, and the police believe this report was made 17 hours after Brenda actually went missing. However, the authorities didn't investigate her disappearance. Brenda was supposed to pick up her 2 children in Clearview on March 2, 1991 for visitation. Brenda loved her children and would never stand them up if she could help them. Maybe she took a quick solo trip to clear her head without telling anyone. It was unlike her, but it was better than accepting that something terrible might have happened to her. Everyone was expecting her to show up in Clearview on March 2nd so that they could put their anxiousness behind them. When Brenda's loved ones heard the news, they couldn't believe it. Brenda's 29th birthday was in 2 days, and she'd made plans before her disappearance. She and her boyfriend Greg were supposed to have a fancy birthday dinner on March 1st, 1991, and on the following day, she was supposed to pick up her children. They were supposed to visit her new home and have a little late birthday celebration. Even if Brenda had taken a break, she would still pick up her children. 12-year-old Todd and 10-year-old Shauna stood outside their father's house with their bags packed, waiting for their mother. The hours went by slowly, and they watched several cars drive past them, but they never saw Brenda's 1986 Mercury Capri. Realizing that his ex-wife and the mother of his children might actually be in danger, Todd explained the situation to the children, and the official investigation for Brenda's disappearance began. An extensive search of the area was conducted in the search for Brenda. Police took dogs, rescue groups, and helicopters, searching every square inch of the area around Carlsbad Tavern. But nothing came up. Local and state police claimed to have conducted numerous interviews, but received no solid results. There were no signs of a struggle, break-in, or robbery inside the bar. Brenda had cleaned up and put away the receipts from the previous shift, which indicated that she was probably ready to go home. However, the bar was unlocked when the day shift crew clocked in, and a cigarette vendor who came to replace the machine recalled that he'd not seen anyone in the bar. So investigators had speculated that whatever had happened would have been in the bar as she prepared to leave. They were able to get the descriptions of 3 male patrons at the bar that night. While the involvement of these men in Brenda's disappearance is still up to speculation, no one has been able to identify them since 1991. The police initially focused on Brenda's ex-husband, Thomas Condon, as a suspect. However, he had a solid alibi. He was busy helping his sister, Pamela Condon, move into her new apartment around the time Brenda went missing. Thomas also took a polygraph test, which relieved him of every suspicion by the authorities. Greg Palazzari, Brenda's boyfriend at the time, was also cleared of every suspicion. The police released every known information about Brenda's disappearance, including the sketches of the 3 men at the bar, to the public. The first man was described as 38 to 40 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a bright blue down jacket and jeans. The second was 25 to 30 years old and 5 feet 8 inches and wearing a black leather coat, a white button-down shirt and jeans. The third patron was approximately 50 years old and 5 feet 8 inches, wearing a short dark-colored jacket, dark-colored slacks, and a brown plaid shirt. A $5,000 reward was also promised to anyone with useful information. Brenda was speculated to be a homicide victim, but without a body, the police had to stick with a missing persons case until something new came up. The Spring Township Police Department had handled the initial investigation back in 1991. In 2008, it was transferred to state police at the request of Spring Township Trooper Brian Wakefield. In a surprising turn of events, in 2014, Greg Palazzari was arrested and convicted for operating a large cocaine ring out of the Sunoco gas station he owned. He was sentenced to 5 to 10 years, but he couldn't complete his sentence as he died on April 21, 2016. Nancy Jones, the woman Greg dated after Brenda's disappearance, had come out to say she believed that Greg might have had something to do with Brenda going missing. She didn't think he could have murdered Brenda, but Nancy believed that Greg might have gotten into trouble with his drug dealing and put Brenda in harm's way. This theory was never proven, and authorities instead believed Brenda's murder might be linked to her workplace. Interestingly, it came to light that shortly after Brenda's disappearance, Carlsbad Tavern had closed down. The police speculated that Brenda's attacker strategically placed her boots in the men's bathroom. Brenda's son, however, thinks otherwise. He recalled that his mother loved and owned a lot of boots, but she never cleaned when wearing them. She would usually change into sneakers, which she found more comfortable. If Brenda had been cleaning, she probably took the boots off herself. Her family continued to stay positive, believing that she was still out there somewhere. On the 10th anniversary of Brenda's disappearance in 2001, police held a press conference with her family about the case, opening up about their lack of leads, the unidentified patrons at the bar, and the choice to put her case in a national database system for missing people. Along the way, Shauna had a daughter of her own now. She was heartbroken that her mother had not gotten the chance to be there for her granddaughter. Brenda's sister Iris had said that Shauna's daughter looked so much like her missing grandmother. 2020 marked the years Brenda had been missing longer than she'd been seen alive, and it was hard for everyone. In April 2024, this case gained renowned attention. Detective Kenneth Maines, a renowned investigator celebrated for solving cold cases in central Pennsylvania and hosting the popular Unsolved No More podcast, took up the challenge of unraveling the mystery. After 33 years since Brenda's puzzling disappearance, he believes he's cracked the case. In a 26-episode YouTube series, he explained what he thought happened to Brenda and who the perpetrator was. According to Maines, this perpetrator was Brenda's co-worker who was known to be a hot-headed womanizer. Members of Carlsbad Tavern crew also affirmed that this co-worker was incredibly obsessed with Brenda's missing person case. Although Brenda had cleaned up, there was a single bottle of beer and some money left on the bar. Maines believed Brenda was done for the night, and this co-worker was waiting for her to close. He also added that this man had been trying to flirt with Brenda, so he took her boots to the men's bathroom and waited for her in the dark. Maines had turned over his findings to Brenda's family, so they may take them to state police investigators. He also offered a $10,000 reward in addition to the $5,000 reward the Pennsylvania State Police was offering anyone with credible information concerning Brenda's case. He said that he hopes the offender comes forward, giving Brenda's family closure, resolution, and peace, which they desire and deserve. Although Maines believed Brenda Condon's case is now solved, officially it still remains open. However, the police claim to have a few new leads that can't be disclosed to the public yet. Anyone with information about Condon's disappearance is urged to contact PA Crime Stoppers by calling 1-800-4PA-TIPS or 1-800-472-8477 or visiting the online tip line. Tips may also be provided to Pennsylvania State Police Rockview Station, which is handling the investigation, by calling 814-355-7545. On April 1st, 1986, 37-year-old Wayne D. Heath and his friend went fishing on the South Fork of the Snake River just below the Palisades Dam in Bonneville County, Idaho. Questions still lingered surrounding the events of that day. What exactly happened to them? Why did only one of them ultimately make it back home? How did the mystery reach a conclusion after being cold for 38 years? Born on September 3, 1949 in Pocatello, Idaho, Wayne D. Heath aspired to serve in the Army. On July 31, 1967, he married Wanda Mendenhall. The very next year, after graduating from Highland High School in Pocatello, Wayne joined the Army in 1968. He then served as a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam, where he earned several awards. Wayne later returned to Wanda after his service, and they lived a happy family life with their 3 children in Pocatello, Idaho. Everything was going well until the inauspicious day of April 1, 1986, when Wayne went fishing with his friend in the Snake River below Palisades Dam. That fateful April day, Wayne set out for a fun day of fishing, yet fate had a different plan in store. That evening, only his friend returned home safely. When Wayne's friend got back, he explained what happened on the boat and why he was worried about where Wayne was. He said that while they'd been fishing, the boat's propeller had suddenly gotten tangled up in a rope, causing the boat to start filling with water. In a desperate attempt to survive, they jumped into the water and attempted to swim to shore in the rushing river. Somehow, he managed to return to the shore, but tragically, Wayne did not. However, his friend hadn't seen Wayne disappear, so he was unsure of whether his friend had drowned or simply been washed downstream. After that day, Wayne never returned, bringing about heartbreak and uncertainty in his family's life. After they were informed, the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office launched a search, but no trace of Wayne was found. The Sheriff's Office found a witness who reported that Wayne had disappeared roughly a quarter of a mile downstream. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, authorities couldn't find any leads in the case. Time passed, and with no new developments in the case, Wayne's family was left in oblivion, uncertain of his fate. The case went cold for years, leaving little hope for closure. Surprisingly, in 2009, something unexpected happened, opening a new door for the case. Nearly 23 years later, in June 2009, a huge development occurred when a local resident found a human tibia on a sandbar while he was fishing in the Snake River near Heisey, Jefferson County. The bone was handed over to law enforcement and sent to the University of Texas for further investigation. The university researchers eventually extracted sufficient DNA to establish a genetic profile. In January 2013, the genetic data was added to the Unidentified Human Remains Index of the Combined DNA Index System. But unfortunately, no match was found, and it remained unidentified for the next 11 years. Finally, in February 2024, the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office received a notification from UNT confirming the identification of the tibia bone. With the help of advanced DNA technology, the UNT researchers had linked the genetic data from the tibia bone to family DNA reference samples from Wayne Heath's biological son and sister. On April 1, 2024, exactly 38 years later, Canole Heath, Wayne's daughter, received a call from law enforcement of Idaho informing her that her father's remains had been identified. The Bonneville County Sheriff's Office credited the advanced technology as well as the DNA collection and storage, which had enabled detectives to identify the remains of Wayne Heath. The authorities didn't release much more information about a confirmed cause of death, but it seems likely that he drowned accidentally that fateful day of April 1, 1986. This brought closure and answers to Wayne's family, finally resolving his decades-old cold case. In the end, Nicole, Wayne's daughter, shared her emotions in an interview.
I always dreamed you'd come to the door and say hi, but it didn't work out that way for us. Now I have more closure. I know where he is. I know him and my mom are together again.
On the seemingly ordinary day of May 24, 1985, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to a call from concerned locals after the remains of an unknown man were discovered in a vacant lot in Gibsonton, Florida. Initially, it appeared as if the man had succumbed to natural causes due to exposure to the elements. Who was this man, and how did he come to be in such a condition? It would be 39 years before the unfortunate victim regained his identity. Upon closer inspection, deputies at the scene noticed a wound to the man's head. After securing the scene, deputies searched the area and had discovered several articles of clothing and personal belongings. However, there was nothing that could have aided in identification or any weapon found in the area near the body. With nothing to go on, the body was removed and taken to the county morgue for further examination. During the autopsy, the coroner determined the man to be aged between 40 and 60 years old. It was also determined that the wound to the man's head was caused by a gunshot and was most likely self-inflicted. Due to exposure to the elements, the coroner determined that he may have been deceased for a couple of weeks. No fingerprints could be taken from the body as the skin had been damaged. In his report, the coroner included the items found along with the man's remains. These were a leather jacket, a tan Western-style long-sleeve shirt, green or brown pants, a white t-shirt, and white jockey shorts. Other items included red ankle boots, a toiletry bag, eyeglasses, and a pack of Merit cigarettes. The coroner also noted that the man's appearance suggested he may have been homeless for a long period of time, as there was visible wear and tear on his clothing and belongings. A forensic composite, together with the coroner's report, was released to the public. Investigators hoped that this information would generate leads and jog the memory of anyone who might have seen him prior to his demise. However, no new tips had come into the sheriff's office. When this attempt had failed, deputies uploaded the details of the case, along with the composite, to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, also known as NamUs. The Hillsborough County John Doe became known as UP-207. Law enforcement officials continued to sift through cases of missing persons in and around the Florida area, but could find no cases that matched with their John Doe. After all efforts were finally exhausted, the case would eventually go cold in the early 1990s. Now and again, cold case detectives revisited the old files and tried searching for the man's identity, but it would be nearly 4 decades later when they had their strongest chance and identified their John Doe. In 2023, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office heard of a new DNA testing program that could link cold case DNA samples to living relatives in and around the United States. All they needed was a workable DNA sample from their John Doe. The skeletal remains had been well preserved, and the Sheriff's Office teamed with Othram Labs in the Woodlands in Texas to carry out this experiment. Scientists at the lab were able to successfully extract a working DNA sample, and using forensic-grade genome sequencing, they had managed to develop a comprehensive DNA profile. Armed with a proper DNA profile, Othram scientists then used the sample in their genetic genealogy testing program in order to find possible leads to relatives of the unidentified man. This too would prove to be a success, as scientists discovered a strong familial link in Knoxville, Tennessee. In January 2024, a team of investigators from the Sheriff's Office made contact with the Ray family in Tennessee. After arranging a meeting with the family, they traveled down to Knoxville and collected DNA samples from the relatives. Further testing revealed that the Ray family did indeed share a strong genetic link to their unidentified John Doe. Investigators returned to Knoxville to interview the family and put together the missing pieces of the puzzle. The man was positively identified as Charles Allen Ray, who was born in 1936.
Able to identify a man who was found dead near Adamsville Avenue, north of Big Bend Road. Charles Allen Ray.
The family explained that Charles was a veteran of the United States Navy and had served his country with honor. However, he'd mysteriously disappeared in 1985 at the age of 49. The last they'd heard of Charles was that he'd traveled to a few different states and nothing more. They believed the reason they couldn't find him was due to the lack of any digital footprint, as technology was still a brand new concept in the 1980s. The identification of their John Doe allowed the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office to finally close the case, giving closure to the man now identified as Charles Allen Ray. Sheriff Chad Chronister said that the dedication and perseverance of the investigation team and the advancement in forensic technology is what ultimately led to the resolution of the case. If you like what you're seeing so far in the video, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button. This story begins on the Tuesday morning of August 28, 1934, when Ellsworth Arthur Teed, a deputy warden for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, followed his usual routine as he said goodbye to his wife Alma and headed to work in his car, a Model A Ford Coupe with a packed lunch. Sadly, Alma didn't know it would be their last goodbye. Teed informed Alma that he was heading to Boulder Gulch to investigate reports of out-of-season poached deer and would return that afternoon for a funeral in town. Alma had patiently awaited her husband's return that day, but he never did. Worried, she alerted her friends, family, and local authorities when her husband failed to return home. Did Ellsworth disappear willingly, or was there something else at play? The lack of leads kept this case unsolved for 90 years. But even then, would his family ever discover what really happened to him? Born in Webb, Clearwater County on November 28, 1894, Ellsworth Teed moved with his young bride and children to Mullen, Shoshone County to embark on a new career as a deputy. Over the years, Teed became well acquainted with the surrounding wilderness. Recognized as a skilled outdoorsman, he'd found an opportunity with the relatively new profession of deputy game warden. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game, IDFG, established in 1899, initially had struggled to secure a game warden in Shoshone County. Wildlife enforcement was a novel idea for the western states and wasn't universally embraced back then. In his new role, Teed oversaw wildlife management in the area, enforcing state hunting and fishing regulations. This often meant targeting the out-of-season harvest of game animals, a common issue faced during the Great Depression. Teed had taken his profession seriously and was considered an effective game warden. Popular with locals, they often provided him with tips about potential poaching. Before he went missing, Deputy Teed had received a tip about possible deer poaching south of Mullen in an area known as Boulder Gulch. On the hot, smoky day of August 28, 1934, he set out in light clothing, parking his car at the base of the gulch near the town cemetery and leaving his lunch and coat in the passenger seat. When he stepped out of the vehicle, his fate remained a mystery. Knowing that her husband was meticulous about informing her of his plans, Alma had become extremely concerned when he didn't return by early afternoon as promised. By early evening, she reported his absence to the Shoshone County local police, fearing he might have been injured or encountered violence while investigating. Authorities quickly found his locked vehicle with his lunch and coat still inside, but no signs of him nearby. His handkerchief was also discovered nearby, along with signs of a struggle. Evidence of poaching, including several deer carcasses, was also found in the vicinity. As darkness approached, the sheriff's deputies decided to wait until the first light to organize a search party. The following 10 days were marked as the largest search effort in Shoshone County history, utilizing resources from 3 states, planes, bloodhounds, and thousands of search hours. Despite these efforts, very little evidence had been found, frustrating family and law enforcement alike, and leaving the haunting question, would Deputy Game Warden Ellsworth Arthur Teed ever be found? On August 28, 1934, the sheriff's posse, comprising approximately 50 officers and volunteers from the area, had commenced to search for evidence of Teed's intended direction from his vehicle. Reports of gunshots from nearby residents raised hopes of a potential distress signal from Teed. Recognizing the urgent need to find Teed alive, Shoshone County Sheriff Fred May had called in for additional resources from nearby towns and the state offices in Boise as the first day of searching concluded. The following morning, on August 29th, saw the arrival of over 200 searchers equipped with advanced search technology. Local pilot Lloyd Donaldson had volunteered to conduct an aerial search with District Forest Ranger E.F. Helmers as his passenger. Ed Kingman from the Walla Walla Penitentiary in Washington had arrived with 2 well-trained tracking bloodhounds to aid in locating the missing deputy. However, the aerial search was brief, lasting only a few hours due to poor visibility caused by a raging forest fire on the St. Joe River. The bloodhounds, accompanied by 10 officers and guides, quickly picked up a promising trail. Despite their efforts, the scent was lost on the second ridge beyond Boulder Gulch. Exhausted and empty-handed, the search team had returned to town after covering 7 miles. By August 31st, 1934, Deputy Game Warden Teed had been missing for 3 days, and desperation began to grip the searchers. 60 young men from a nearby Civilian Conservation Corps camp, CCC, had joined the search, swelling the team to nearly 250, including Teed's sons and brother. Despite these efforts, doubts about finding Teed began to surface among the searchers as Teed remained elusive. By September 3rd, 1934, Monday evening, officers and the posse members felt defeated and hopeless. No matter their tireless efforts, no evidence of Teed's whereabouts, accidental or criminal, could be found. Rumors that Teed had crossed state lines following the people he was investigating diverted attention away from Boulder Gulch, prompting authorities to explore leads in neighboring states, but with no success. In a gesture of solidarity, the Shoshone County Sportsmen's Association offered a cash reward of $100 for information reflecting the community's determination to find Deputy Game Warden Teed. The president of the Shoshone County Sportsmen's Association, Ingersoll, stated, "Search efforts for Deputy Teed had lost momentum as only a few volunteers and groups of young men from the CCC continued to scour the mountains." Meanwhile, law enforcement had shifted focus to investigative efforts. Initial inquiries by the Wallace and Kellogg police yielded little, as Teed was found to have no known enemies or disputes. Authorities speculated that he may have sustained an injury and was unable to seek help. A sighting resembling Teed in Paradise, Montana, prompted Shoshone County deputies to investigate, but the individual was discovered to be a hitchhiker with no connection to the case. Feeling the investigation stall, Teed's sister from Kamloops, BC, offered an additional $300 reward for information leading to her brother's whereabouts, valid for 30 days. On September 25, 1934, State Game Warden Eckert and North Idaho Game Warden Quarles had returned to Shoshone County, indicating hot new clues and reaffirming their commitment to resolving the mystery. An anonymous Spokane resident had contacted the sheriff, claiming to know Teed's whereabouts. The informant, a former colleague of Teed's at the Morning Mine in Mullen, revealed encountering Teed on the way from Republic, Washington, headed towards Canada on September 15th or 16th, 2 weeks after his disappearance. Initially hesitant to come forward, the informant had changed his mind, leading to a meeting between the sheriff, game wardens, and the anonymous tipster. Their collective assessment deemed the informant's story substantially correct, with a belief that Teed was alive and well somewhere in Canada. Although there was a commitment to resume the search following this new lead, no additional public updates were disclosed regarding the investigation into Deputy Teed's whereabouts. Over 1,000 officers and volunteers had combed the area for weeks, prompting local newspapers to dub it the largest search operation in the state's history. Despite exhaustive efforts, neither Teed nor his remains were ever recovered. On February 6, 1942, the Idaho State District Court officially declared Deputy Teed deceased. Alma Teed was subsequently granted spousal benefits. Deputy Teed's family, which included his wife, 3 sons, and a stepson, were all devastated by his absence. For decades, the case remained inactive. Then, in February 2023, Idaho Fish and Game honored Deputy Teed. They accepted him into the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Idaho Peace Officers Memorial. This recognition acknowledged his service as having been lost in the line of duty on the day of his disappearance back in 1934. This information was shared in a news release on the agency's website. The announcement had garnered the attention of local news stations, prompting individuals to reach out to the sheriff's office to inquire about the circumstances surrounding Teed's disappearance. A routine press release preceding the state ceremony on May 18, 2023, had prompted an unidentified witness to come forward with new information. Sheriff's Office Captain Seth Green stated that what was initially dismissed as a family story about the game warden's death, passed down for generations, now seemed to be more believable. The Shoshone County Sheriff's Office received information from 4 unidentified individuals regarding the events surrounding Teed's disappearance. George Pentland, his teenage son John Robert Pentland, and another teenager named Oscar Downing were reportedly poaching deer in the Mullen area when they encountered Teed. George Pentland allegedly killed Teed, with the two boys assisting in disposing of his body. The Shoshone County Sheriff's Office declared the case closed after all the witnesses shared similar testimonies. Neither the names nor the statements of the witnesses were disclosed. Sheriff's Office Captain Seth Green explained, "We verified the individuals' family histories, conducted interviews, and found consistency in their accounts, which were independently corroborated." He further emphasized that the information provided by the witnesses was compelling, as each person offered detailed and consistent narratives of the alleged homicide of Teed. Despite the closure of the case, the Sheriff's Office had declined to release witness statements or further details regarding the alleged homicide. Additionally, they stated that they'd not search for Teed's remains, citing environmental factors such as fires and heavy rains over the years, which could have potentially relocated the remains to an entirely different area. Reflecting on the case's resolution, Sheriff's Office Captain Green expressed satisfaction at having unearthed answers to a nearly 90-year-old cold case, stating, "It's gratifying to bring some closure. My team and Fish and Game were determined to get to the bottom of it." Investigator Adeline Watkins from Idaho Fish and Game noted the case's uniqueness due to its antiquity. With no police reports available, investigators had relied on newspaper records and oral accounts. Watkins expressed that despite the case being officially closed, more individuals might come forward with additional information. She emphasized the significance of the breakthrough for the Teed family, stating, "For the family, it was closure." Ellsworth Teed was the great-uncle of Melissa Seller Teed's husband, and she knew Teed's 3 sons. She'd stated that they'd often discuss their father and how they wished they knew if he was killed in an accident or at the hands of someone else. When Teed disappeared, his sons, aged 8 to 14, had to grow up without their father and passed away without ever discovering his fate. On February 17, 2024, retired Detective Stephen Rizzo of Delaware State Police wrote, "The Vidocq Society recently announced that your killing has been officially closed with the official identities of your assailants being named. Deputy Teed, it's my great honor to leave a reflection on your heroic actions and to say thank you for your service and sacrifice. I hope you rest easier and your loved ones can take solace knowing that your case is officially closed, as well as knowing that you'll never be forgotten by your law enforcement family." Deputy Teed had quite evidently left a long-standing mark on his loved ones who look back on his memories with utter respect. Deputy Ellsworth Arthur Teed lived honorably by consistently doing the right thing. His story will forever remain a testament to integrity and morality. Though it took 90 years for his family to find closure after his untimely death, the revelation finally brought them peace. On June 21, 2000, a disturbing discovery was made at an apartment community in Winter Park, Florida, when a resident stumbled upon a human skull. The Orange County Sheriff's Office was quick to respond, and their investigation led to a nearby vacant lot. Here, they unearthed additional skeletal remains and clothing, partially buried. Forensic experts were called in and determined these were the remains of a Caucasian male aged between 40 and 60 years old. Who was this man? And how did his remains end up buried in this quiet community? Despite authorities' desperate efforts to uncover the mystery, nothing seemed to work. The case remained buried in dusty files, destined to stay hidden for another 24 years. On June 21, 2000, a bizarre and grim event unfolded at Caliber Bend Apartments in Winter Park, Florida. That morning, a resident noticed a couple of cats playing with an unusual object. Upon closer inspection, the horrifying truth came to light. It was a human skull. This alarming find prompted an immediate response from the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Deputies and detectives cordoned off the area to conduct a thorough search. Their efforts led them to a vacant lot near the apartments, where they discovered more skeletal remains and personal items, all partially buried. Among these were clothing and, shockingly, a small caliber gun lying close to the remains. The next step was an autopsy and forensic analysis. Forensic anthropologists were brought in to examine the remains. Their findings were unsettling. The bones belonged to a Caucasian male, estimated to be between 40 and 60 years old. The condition of the remains suggested that they'd been there for about 7 to 8 years. More disturbing was the cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head, confirmed by the hole in the skull. Forensic doctors were confident the man had been shot. Despite exhaustive efforts by the detectives, the lack of victimology, the study of victim profiles, hindered the investigation. Without a clear starting point or identifying information, the case eventually grew cold. How did this unidentified individual end up in an unmarked grave in a vacant lot? What chain of events led to his untimely death? The answers to these questions remain a mystery. The investigation of the remains found at Caliber Bend Apartments quickly escalated into a full-blown inquiry by the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Detectives were faced with a challenge of piecing together a puzzle with few pieces available. The discovery of a small caliber gun near the remains added a potential clue, but also raised more questions than answers. Who did the gun belong to? Was it used in the crime? The task was daunting. The forensic team worked diligently, examining the skeletal remains and the items found at the scene. Each piece of clothing, the positioning of the remains, and the presence of the gun were all meticulously documented and analyzed. However, the lack of immediate identifiers and the time lapse since death significantly hampered the investigation. Despite the diligent efforts of law enforcement, no identifying characteristics emerged for the victim of this tragic homicide. He was referred to only as John Doe, and all known details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, under the identifier UP528. With the man's identity unknown and the trail running cold, investigators faced a significant challenge in solving the case. After 22 years of being cold, the case finally began to thaw out. In August 2022, a pivotal moment arrived in the long unsolved mystery of the John Doe case. The Orange County Sheriff's Department decided to collaborate with Othram, a cutting-edge forensic laboratory located in the Woodlands, Texas. This collaboration aimed to use the latest advancements in DNA technology to breathe new life into this cold case. Othram's team took a crucial step by developing a DNA extract from a partial subsampling of the skeletal remains discovered back in 2000. Using their proprietary forensic-grade genome sequencing, they constructed a comprehensive DNA profile of the unidentified man. This profile wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was the key that could potentially unlock the identity of the victim. With a complete DNA profile in hand, Othram's in-house genealogy team embarked on a meticulous process using forensic genetic genealogy. This method combines DNA analysis with public and private genealogical databases to trace family lineages and potentially identify relatives of the unknown deceased. The genealogists' efforts paid off as they produced new investigative leads based on the DNA profile. These leads were immediately handed back to law enforcement, who initiated a follow-up investigation. This phase was crucial, as detectives now had specific paths to follow. Paths that could lead them to relatives of the unidentified man. The follow-up investigation involved contacting potential relatives and collecting more DNA samples for crucial confirmatory tests. This sensitive phase required careful handling, as it involved reaching out to individuals who might not know about their connection to a long-standing mystery. Finally, after rigorous confirmation DNA testing, the investigators were able to formally identify the unknown man. The skeletal remains belonged to Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau Jr. This breakthrough was more than just a resolution to a name. It was the first step in providing closure to a family who had likely been missing a loved one without even knowing where he was or what had happened to him. Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau Jr. was born on October 29, 1951. Known affectionately as Larry by those close to him, Larry was around 40 years old when he met his untimely death, a fact that only came to light decades later through forensic breakthroughs. Larry's early life unfolded near the very spot where his remains were eventually discovered, an area off the corner of University and Goldenrod in Orange County. This location was part of a 12-acre property where his family lived. He attended Colonial High School, growing up in a community he knew well throughout his youth. Described by Orange County homicide detective Scott Lowen as a smooth talker, Larry was remembered not as a violent person, but as someone who was charismatic and engaging. His life, however, was not without its complications. He had his run-ins with the law and was arrested a couple of times, which led some family members to speculate that he might have ended up in prison. This assumption caused them to lose track of him, with many thinking he was incarcerated, which tragically obscured the truth of his disappearance and death. At the time of his disappearance, around the early 1990s, Larry's absence was noted but not understood. The family's search was hampered by the lack of information and the assumption of his incarceration. They could only find photographs of Larry as a baby and from his high school years. Unfortunately, there weren't any recent pictures to help with a more up-to-date search. This lack of visual documentation added another layer of complexity to the already challenging efforts to trace his whereabouts or fate. Fortunately, in 2024, there was news of the Larry case being solved. Identifying Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau Jr. provided his family with long-awaited closure after years of uncertainty. However, for the homicide detectives dedicated to solving his case, the journey is far from over. They now face the arduous task of piecing together the events that led to Larry's untimely death, a puzzle complicated by the passage of time. Detective Scott Lowen, leading the investigation, expresses the challenges they encounter. People move away, people pass away, stuff like that. So that's a problem when you start working on a case that's been lying around for this long. We're just hoping to get anybody that knew him to call in and give information to help us get a starting point. The call to action is clear. Anyone with insights into Larry's acquaintances, frequent locations, or lifestyle is urged to come forward. The community's cooperation is crucial. Information that may seem trivial or unrelated could provide the missing link needed to advance the investigation. In an effort to facilitate tips, the Central Florida Crime Line has made it possible for individuals to report information anonymously by calling 888-423-TIPS or 8477. On December 12, 1994, state workers from Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, were surveying a defunct mining area in Sugarloaf Township as part of their mining reclamation project. While conducting a walkabout near a coal bank off Tom Hicken Road, they made a shocking discovery. Skeletal remains were discovered scattered from the top to the bottom of the bank. The Pennsylvania State Police were called to the scene immediately. As the police arrived, the entire area was cordoned off as they searched for evidence. There was no visible evidence of a grave having been dug, leading police to believe the body had been left exposed to the elements. After speaking with the workers who'd made the discovery, police allowed the coroner to have the remains taken to the Luzerne County mortuary for an autopsy. Whose remains were buried and kept hidden from the world? Who was responsible for this? The connection wouldn't be established until 2024, 30 years after the chilling discovery. At the mortuary, the coroner pieced together the skeletal remains. He was able to determine that the skeleton belonged to a woman. Her height was estimated to be between 5'1" and 5'4" inches. In her mouth was a foreign metal object that they couldn't properly identify. Further examination of the remains allowed the coroner to estimate her age as being anywhere between 34 to 47 years old. He also believed that she may have died any time between 6 months to 2 years prior to her body being found. The decomposition had been sped up due to exposure to the elements. During the autopsy, the coroner found other details that could possibly help the investigative team. With further examination of the bone structure, the coroner determined that she was of a medium build and likely right-handed. He also noted that she'd suffered from arthritis in her back and leg, which could have affected her gait. There were also signs that she had possibly given birth to at least one child. Other than that, there was no way to determine her cause of death. There had also been clothes found on the remains. There was a yellow or gold shirt with the inscription, "Kiss my ass, I'm on vacation." Light-colored McGregor brand sweatpants, size 6 boys' British night shoes, and Hanes Herway underwear. These descriptions were given to investigators who entered these details into a missing persons database. A statewide search for information revealed no new leads, and it appeared as if the woman had not been reported missing. Without any way to formally identify the remains, she became known as the Sugarloaf Jane Doe. In 1996, forensic artist Frank Bender studied the Jane Doe's remains and developed a clay sculpture of her possible facial features. Investigators believed this would help in identifying their Jane Doe, and these images were uploaded to the Pennsylvania State Police database. These images, along with the coroner's description and clothing report, were made public. However, this report didn't garner much information. As more missing persons cases came into the police station, investigators worked to compare their Jane Doe with the new cases to no avail. In the early 2000s, the University of South Florida introduced a new method of testing organic and inorganic materials called isotope testing. Isotope testing allowed forensic analysts to determine what the specimen may have been exposed to and could determine areas a person or object may have passed through. The researchers at the university used bone fragments to conduct their testing and determined that it was possible she could have been to Florida, Texas, and other southeastern regions prior to her death. Using this information, investigators looked through scores of missing persons cases in these regions, but found nothing that could help them identify their Jane Doe. Her details were eventually entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons, or NamUs, database as UP8919. With technology advancing at a rapid rate, investigators tried another approach around 2005. Using the Jane Doe's new DNA profile and the clay sculpture created by Bender, a much more refined computer-generated image of the Sugarloaf Jane Doe was developed and circulated to the public and the media. The police also had offered a reward for any information. Tips came in, but nothing helped them crack the case of the Sugarloaf Jane Doe. The case ultimately went cold, and for nearly 3 decades, their Jane Doe remained nameless, until a new technological advancement gave the investigators hope. In 2020, genetic genealogy testing was fast growing in popularity. People were encouraged to submit their DNA samples to laboratories in order to develop their family trees and test their genealogy. Cold case investigators had started to use this technology to solve cold cases and decades-old mysteries. In May 2023, the Pennsylvania State Police decided to submit DNA samples taken from the Sugarloaf Jane Doe to Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas. Their gamble would pay off greatly. Their Jane Doe's DNA was a match to a woman living in Philadelphia. They'd made contact with a woman who agreed to submit a second DNA sample to be tested against Jane Doe's DNA. It was a positive match, and the DNA markers revealed another interesting bit of information. The woman was Jane Doe's sister. She was able to tell police about their Jane Doe, but opted to keep her own name private. In February 2024, after 30 years of anonymity, Sugarloaf Jane Doe finally had a name: Margaret Carol Winninger.
The family of a Philadelphia woman who vanished in the early 1990s finally has some closure. Her body has been identified nearly 30 years after it was found near the Poconos. Her name is Margaret Carol Winninger. Margaret's remains were found in Sugarloaf Township back in December 1994. Up until now, she was known as Sugarloaf Jane Doe.
She would have been either 44 or 45 years old at the time of her death. She was born on September 5, 1948 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and attended West Hazleton High School from 1965 to 1966. Her father was a greenskeeper at the Valley Country Club in Pennsylvania, and her mother was a homemaker. Her parents would end up getting divorced in 1965, and Margaret's sister went on to join the Women's Army Corps soon after. Margaret's sister said that after their parents' divorce, the both of them had started their own lives. They did keep in contact, but over the years, that too became infrequent. The last time she'd heard from Margaret was in the early 1990s, at which time she'd been living with relatives in Northeast Philadelphia. When Margaret had gone missing, the family had reached out to the police, but there were no leads and her case had gone cold. There was not much else Margaret's sister could provide investigators with, as she'd not been so involved in her sister's adult life. The identification of Margaret closed one chapter in the Sugarloaf Jane Doe case, but investigators have continued to investigate the manner of her death. The public is urged to come forward with any information about Margaret, especially anyone who may have been in contact with her in the late 1990s. Those with leads can contact Trooper Brian Knoll from the Pennsylvania State Police Troop Criminal Investigation Unit at 570-220-8475. On the morning of January 24th, 1985, as a truck driver headed south on Highway 78 near Olive Branch, Mississippi, he saw something horrifying. Just east of the Coldwater River Bridge, at around 7:30 a.m., he spotted a dead body. Without wasting any time, he called the police. When the detectives from the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office arrived, they found the body, which was that of a woman. Her body was 20 feet south of the highway, and her shoes, undergarments, and jacket were all missing. The clothes she had on were a light peach-colored short-sleeve pullover top with embroidery on the front and blue Gloria Vanderbilt brand jeans. The body was then sent for an autopsy. Who was this woman, and how did she end up like this? These questions puzzled many, but no one expected it would take 39 years to solve the mystery. Upon closer inspection, she seemed to have been dead for a few days, but her facial features were still identifiable. The investigators figured out that she'd been a victim of strangulation, possibly by a ligature. The woman weighed about 110 pounds and stood at 5 feet 3 inches tall. She probably was aged between 20 and 35, and her hair was wavy, with a light red to blonde color, and was of medium length. She had 3 piercings in each ear. They also found tattoos on the inside of both of her ankles and a small surgical scar on her left forearm. However, even with all this information, identifying her was a challenge. There were no documents on her or around the body to identify her, so unfortunately, she had to be treated as a Jane Doe. Her remains were laid to rest at Blocker Cemetery in Olive Branch under the name Jane Doe. The case details were added to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System as UP 8675. Moreover, it instantly became a homicide case as they identified the cause of death as strangulation, but the why remained a mystery. Back in the 1980s, they didn't have all the advanced techniques we have today. Test after test was done, and any possible lead was followed, but nothing turned up. Eventually, the police had to shelve the file with the other cold cases. However, in 2022, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office, along with the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner, decided to give it another shot. They sent forensic evidence gathered from her body to Othram in the Woodlands, Texas, hoping advanced DNA testing could finally help identify the murdered woman. Previous attempts hadn't worked out, but this time they hoped that they'd get at least one clue to follow up on. Funding for this endeavor came from Mississippi native and philanthropist Carla Davis, who was determined to solve cold cases in her home state. Fortunately, Othram scientists were able to work their magic and managed to develop a DNA profile using forensic-grade genome sequencing. With this profile, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team got to work. They dug deep into the available data, tracing family trees and connections. Eventually, they found some new leads for law enforcement to follow up on. There appeared to be relatives of the woman who were identified due to their similar DNA profiles. After the initial breakthrough, investigators tracked down these relatives of the murdered woman. By testing the DNA profile of the murdered woman against that of a close relative who chose to remain anonymous, they confirmed her identity as Lori Ann Mueller Pennell, who was born on September 6, 1962 in Missouri. She had been 22 years old at the time of her death. According to an announcement on March 1, 2024, Pennell had been spotted days before her disappearance at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Her family filed a missing persons report in West Memphis, Arkansas, but she was never found. Well, finally, the family knew what had happened to her, and the identity of Jane Doe was revealed. However, the circumstances of her death are still being investigated, and there have been no further updates provided at this time. On August 26, 1998, the city of Pensacola witnessed a crime that would haunt the neighborhood for a staggering 26 years. After shopping at a Winn-Dixie supermarket on Navy Boulevard, ex-Army veteran 46-year-old Stephen Davis was just about to return home. He used to drive an old yellow cab as his personal vehicle and also worked as a cab dispatcher. But unbeknownst to him, someone was already inside his cab waiting for him. At about 4 in the morning, as he entered his vehicle, a barrage of gunshots would traumatize him. One after another, 3 shots were fired at him from the back. He got out of the car and tried to run back toward the Winn-Dixie, which was just across the parking lot. However, he stumbled and fell down and eventually succumbed to his injuries. It certainly seemed like a planned attack, but catching the perpetrator behind this murder wasn't going to be such an easy task. In fact, closure wouldn't arrive for nearly 3 decades. But why would it take so long? As the police reached the scene and took a good look at Stephen's body, they saw that he'd suffered 1 gunshot wound to his jaw and 2 to his right posterior thorax. It was clear that Stephen had died very soon after he fell down in the lot. Now, as the police searched for answers, they found Stephen's cab near Navy Boulevard completely abandoned. The driver's door and rear passenger doors were open, and the cab's driver's side window was also shattered. When the forensic department examined the crime scene, they discovered a bloody fingerprint. The evidence was taken to the department to run some tests. The blood was found to be Stephen Davis's. However, they found no match for the fingerprint in their database. Sheriff Chip Simmons of the Escambia County Sheriff's Office said that they tried to check for matches not once but 3 times, but they never got any results. There was even video footage of the event recorded on the CCTV camera of the parking lot, but it didn't help in solving the case, as nothing distinct was noticeable. In order to pay respect to Stephen, the cab company he worked for shut down for the day, and everyone attended the funeral. Dozens of cabs lined up and down the roads of the area where the funeral took place. In the days following the murder, a detailed flyer was circulated that described very clearly a man who was seen in the area around the same time as the murder. The flyer also described the man as someone who was applying for a job at a place nearby or had already been employed there. But there were no responses to this. Now, with no further clues and information, the police were left with no choice but to shelf the case as unsolved. And as fate would have it, the case remained cold for many years to come. However, 25 years later, in 2023, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office asked for the help of more than 20 retired officers in opening a number of cold cases from long ago. And among the 4 cases was the case of Stephen Davis.
There are some cases that we've had DNA, and the DNA shows, one aspect of the case, without getting too many details, one aspect of the case. It may or may not show the person that actually committed the homicide, but it might lead you to that individual. Maybe the individual that did this crime is now incarcerated for life or for a long time, and there's someone's empowered now to go ahead and get that off their chest. And we're hoping that happens. That's why we publicize the cases that we're going to work.
And now, 25 years later, the detectives were able to secure a breakthrough. And after reopening the Stephen Davis case, when the police used new technology to run some tests, they got a match for the bloody fingerprint in early 2024. Back in 2012, a man named Donald Holmes II was arrested for a home invasion robbery in Escambia County. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2014 and had been set to be released in 2032. The fingerprint from that fateful day belonged to none other than Donald Holmes II. Now, as the case continues to be wrapped up, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office said on the morning of March 5, 2024, that they'll be charging Donald Holmes II with the murder. Stephen's surviving family members, his 2 sisters, commented on the arrest when it was announced.
I'm glad you enjoyed your freedom. Now, you're going to be thinking about this till God takes you home.
No further updates have been provided by the police or prosecutors regarding when the trial will begin. On December 20th, 1987, a resident walking his dog along the intersection of 130th Avenue and 72nd Road North near Royal Palm Beach in Florida made a grisly discovery. Near a stand of trees, he discovered the naked remains of an unknown woman who was abandoned on the sandy patch. He contacted the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and informed them of his discovery. The PBCSO, along with the county medical examiner, arrived at the scene shortly after the call was made. This discovery had left officers baffled and asking who this woman was and what had led to her tragic end. Unfortunately, none of these answers would emerge as expected. They would remain elusive for 37 years. After sealing off the scene, deputies searched the surrounding area but found no clothes or information that could help identify the deceased woman. No jewelry was found on the body or in the surrounding area as well. The coroner believed that the body had been exposed to the elements for a rather long time. Her body was removed from the scene and taken in for further examination at the county morgue. An autopsy was conducted by the coroner, who estimated her to be either in her late 20s or late 30s. An analysis of the corpse revealed that the mystery woman had light brown hair with streaks of gray and an approximate height of 5'3". Additionally, it was discovered that she had extensive dental work done, evident from the 8 tooth fillings. While studying the bone structure, the coroner noted that she may have suffered from a back injury or had developed severe arthritis and also had a fracture to her right collarbone. Although the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, the case was still listed as a suspected homicide. The coroner also estimated that she'd been deceased for at least a year before her discovery. Without any means of identifying her, she was listed as a Jane Doe. Investigators compared other missing persons cases to that of their Jane Doe, but could find nothing close to the area where she'd been discovered. The case remained open, yet whatever little leads the authorities had eventually went cold. In 2005, with advancement in technology, the PBSO used the traditional method of short tandem repeat testing, better known as STR testing, to develop a DNA profile of their Jane Doe. It proved to be successful despite the age of the remains, and a DNA profile was uploaded to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. Using the markers from the DNA profile, a digital forensic sketch of what the woman may have looked like was developed and circulated through the media to generate potential leads from the public. Several leads had come in following the release of the woman's digital image. However, these proved to be unrelated to the case of Jane Doe. Investigators worked tirelessly to identify the woman, but no new leads led to the case growing cold again in the mid-2000s. The case information was uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, better known as NamUs, and the Jane Doe was listed as UP-1213. For the next 3 decades, the case stayed cold until 2023. With the help of Senator Jennifer Bradley and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, a grant was awarded to the county to officially reopen investigations in unidentified human remains cases. This allowed the PBSCO to collaborate with Othram Labs based in the Woodlands, Texas, in September 2023. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists had managed to develop a comprehensive DNA profile. The profile was sampled against the genetic genealogy bank they developed over the years. This generated new leads, and a match was discovered between their Jane Doe and a 38-year-old woman living in Nashville, Tennessee. The woman's name was Jessica Rust, and investigators made contact with her, requesting a DNA sample that could be used to test against the Jane Does. The DNA samples matched strongly, suggesting a parent and child relationship between Jessica and the Jane Doe. Investigators interviewed Jessica and had learned more about her connection to Jane Doe. On February 5, 2014, Patty Lisa Logierricio Rust was identified as the Palm Beach County Jane Doe. Patty was born in 1960 in Florida to parents Elizabeth English and Anthony Logierricio. She had 2 brothers named Stephen and Anthony. On November 14, 1984, she'd married Kenneth Allen Rust, and soon after gave birth to a baby girl named Jessica. The family lived in Lauderdale by the Sea in Broward County, Florida. However, in 1986, Patty had gone missing without a trace. Family and friends tried their best to find her, but without any possible leads, she became another missing person in the system. After 37 long years, thanks to advancements in forensic technology, Patty's family received the closure they were seeking. Jessica, who has her own YouTube channel called Rust on the Road, documented the emotional journey upon discovering her mother was the Jane Doe found in Palm Beach in 1987.
Literally about to put on some pants and some shoes and head down to the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department because they said that there was a hit on a genealogy report for me and the location of Patty Lisa Rust, which is my mom. So it's just crazy to think about how long of a journey this has been. I think I cried out most of it, and then like getting rained on like quelled me a little bit. And when I was sitting in the lobby for like waiting for the detectives to come get me, and I almost started crying again, and then there was like this break in the clouds and like the sun just shone directly on me. When people ask me about my family, and I would have to kind of like skirt around it and be like, my mom went missing when I was little and nothing ever came of it. I don't know. It was so confusing to people, and they would ask so many questions that I didn't have the answers to. And like I just accepted that after a while, right? Like what can you do? Like you can't drive yourself crazy trying to like find answers. Like that's just not how the world works. And it's such a hard thing to process because I know we're all in a lot of pain and it's a lot of shock for everyone today. And like again, I hate being the steward of that. But I'm just very grateful to still have them and to have been able to facilitate that today. So again, we're going to close out the day in a very positive light and just be grateful I'm surrounded by people that love me and loved my mom.
The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office has continued to investigate Patty's death as they suspect foul play may have led to her death. The case remains ongoing, and investigators are seeking anyone who may have known Patty or seen her in the months prior to her demise. Anyone with information can contact Detective John Cogburn at 561-688-4063. The day of May 11th, 1974 unfolded like countless others in the peaceful corners of Connecticut, but the tranquility was shattered by an unexpected call to the state police. An anonymous tipster informed them about two bodies lying hidden behind a house on Shoeville Road in Ledyard, a quaint hamlet nestled by the flowing Thames River. The police were guided by the elusive tipster's lead and descended upon the wooded expanse behind the house, worrying about what they might find. Hours turned into days as they scoured every inch of the forest floor, but couldn't find anything. Slowly, they started having doubts that perhaps there was no truth to the tip and no grisly murder to uncover. Just when they were about to give up and turn back, something incredible happened. On May 30th, 1974, they discovered two lifeless bodies lying in plain sight in a wooded area. One appeared to be a man, the other a woman, with the woman's body left underneath the man's. However, the bodies found were in a horrifying state of decay. The woman, who couldn't be identified, had decomposed to the point where she was almost skeletal and her features were unrecognizable. On the other hand, the man's body was still in the process of decomposing. As investigators surveyed the scene, a perplexing detail emerged. While the female victim was wrapped in a blanket, both bodies had been left in plain sight, almost defiantly. This led them to a chilling realization. The killer wasn't concerned with hiding their crime. Instead, it seemed like a brazen challenge to the authorities. The next step was clear: identifying the victims. With their identities crucial to the investigation, the remains were swiftly sent for autopsies in the hopes that this could reveal who the victims were. The reports revealed the identity of the male victim, Gustavus Lee Carmichael, a notorious bank robber who had eluded authorities since 1970. At the tender age of 24 in that same year, Gustavus had embarked on a spree of community bank robberies, amassing a decent sum for himself. However, it appeared that his criminal escapades had come to a halt when he was captured by authorities. But on October 25, 1970, he vanished in a daring escape from a Massachusetts prison transport when he and his partner in crime, Roger H. Brown, seized their chance for freedom. Using their own handcuffs to restrain the unsuspecting federal agents, they made off with their weapons and disappeared into the wilderness. But instead of laying low, they boldly continued their spree of bank robberies. However, fate had different plans for the duo. While Roger was eventually apprehended and sentenced to a lengthy prison term of 64 years, Gustavo stayed on the run until he was found dead next to a female victim. It's likely that his luck ran out soon after he found her. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they couldn't shake the suspicion that Gustavo's and Jane Doe's murders must be connected. Despite their best efforts, identifying Jane Doe proved challenging, as all the Doe Project could provide was a basic description. The victim was likely a white female, aged between 18 to 30, approximately 5 foot 2 inches, with brown or auburn hair. The advanced decomposition made it impossible to determine her eye color and any unique features. However, a newspaper article in the Lewiston Evening Journal offered a slightly different description of Jane Doe. According to the article, she was believed to be in her 20s, standing at about 5'1", with striking red hair and weighing between 110 to 115 pounds. Furthermore, the scene yielded some crucial clues in the form of her clothing. She was dressed in a fashionable ensemble, including a tan leather vest, a gold or tan sweater, a brown tweed skirt, knee-high granny boots, and a yellow raincoat. Additionally, she wore what appeared to be a school graduation ring bearing the letters JHNS or JNHS with the initials ILN engraved on the inside. The discovery of the ring was a breakthrough for investigators, but not in the way they expected. Engraved with the date 1917, it hinted at a graduation long before Jane Doe's time. In the United States, class rings are cherished symbols worn by students and graduates to celebrate their academic achievements. But in Jane Doe's case, the perplexing date on this particular ring raised more questions than answers. While class rings are typically associated with high school, college, or university graduations, the vintage 1917 engraving suggested a graduation from a bygone era. This led investigators to speculate that the ring might have belonged to a parent or even a grandparent and was a cherished family heirloom. Luckily, the initials JHNS or JNHS etched on the ring offered a glimmer of hope in uncovering Jane Doe's identity, as it hinted at a potential school affiliation within her family. They embarked on a cross-country journey, sending officers to various states in pursuit of clues. They visited numerous schools, diligently inquiring about the ring and scouring through dusty yearbooks from 1917. Yet, despite their tireless efforts, the trail went cold, as it was too difficult at that time to find such an old connection, which left them with nothing but frustration and unanswered questions. In a desperate attempt, investigators also entertained the possibility that the initials on the ring could be linked to a nursing school. With this theory in mind, they spread the word far and wide, placing stories in nursing and medical bulletins across the nation. However, despite their optimism, their efforts yielded no results. With this setback, they again went through the items found near Jane Doe's body, and one thing that captured the attention of investigators was that she was wearing intriguing accessories. Among them was another ring with a replica emerald stone. Alongside the ring was a distinctive wood-carved brooch or pendant shaped like an abstract ceremonial head. The only other personal item found with Jane Doe's remains was a Lady Clairol hair roller set, which indicated that she took pride in her appearance. This suggested that she was someone who cared about her grooming and likely paid attention to her looks. But whomever killed her had simply thrown her in the swamp with no respect for her or her belongings. While Jane Doe's dental records were technically accessible, they posed a significant challenge for investigators. Both she and Gustavos met their tragic end through homicide by gunshot wounds. Gustavos suffered fatal injuries to his head and chest, while Jane Doe's cause of death was a gunshot wound to her head and brain. The bullet entered through her mouth, which destroyed her upper jaw. This devastating injury severely limited the dental records available for comparison. The extent of the damage meant that only a fraction of her dental records could be recovered, rendering them insufficient for a conclusive match. However, investigators managed to create a composite sketch of Jane Doe, envisioning what she might have looked like while alive. They hoped that comparing this sketch with missing persons cases would lead them to her identity. But their efforts hit a dead end once again. Despite scouring through countless records, there were no matches, suggesting that Jane Doe had never been reported missing. Despite the limitations of the 1970s, authorities were relentless in their pursuit of justice. It was painstaking work to compile records without the aid of modern computerized systems. However, their determination only grew stronger when they determined that Jane Doe and Gustavus had met their untimely demise in late 1970, a staggering 4 years before their bodies were discovered. Armed with this vital information, investigators doubled down on their efforts and now pursued the only lead they had left: a phone bill found along with the other items near the body of Jane Doe that they assumed belonged to her. The discovery of Jane Doe's phone bill revealed a trail of calls made to various cities across multiple states. From Nashville, Tennessee to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and even as far as Buffalo, New York, the calls spanned a wide geographical area. Interestingly, they were outgoing calls from Newark, Delaware, and incoming calls from Buffalo, New York, suggesting a pattern of communication that traversed state lines. What stood out was that these calls were made over a span of 2 months, from November to December of 1970. The final call listed was made on December 17, 1970. However, investigators couldn't be certain if Jane Doe herself placed these calls. What's intriguing is that the calls were addressed to a person named C.M. Fox Jr., but they had no report in the investigation of who he was. Yet it wasn't long before the police stumbled upon their first significant clue, which was a name associated with Jane Doe. They found out that people around the area of Shoeville knew her as Lorraine Stahl. She was often spotted driving a distinctive green 1964 Oldsmobile with either Massachusetts or Maine license plates. Shortly after Gustavus escaped from the prison transport, it was believed he crossed paths with this unknown woman. Rumors also swirled that she might have been evading the law alongside Gustavus, but these speculations lacked confirmation. The possibility of their involvement in criminal activities together intrigued investigators. However, their excitement turned to shock when they realized that Lorraine's identity was actually stolen. As time had passed, the authorities found themselves at a standstill despite the evidence gathered at the scene. They were unable to uncover any significant clues pointing to the killer, leaving them frustrated and back at square one. That's when their focus shifted to the house near where the bodies were discovered. Little did they know, this house held the key to solving the case. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that the house belonged to a man named Richard DeFreitas. When investigators conducted a background check on Richard, they uncovered a startling revelation. Yet it wasn't long before the police stumbled upon their first significant clue, which was a name associated with Jane Doe. They found out that people around the area of Shoeville knew her as Lorraine Stahl. She was often spotted driving a distinctive green 1964 Oldsmobile with either Massachusetts or Maine license plates. Richard and his partner Donald Brandt had a history of robbing banks and operating several safe houses across Connecticut. It seemed they were deeply involved in criminal activities, sharing the proceeds equally. Now, armed with this information, in 1974, the police paid a visit to their house to interview them about the murders of Gustavus and Jane Doe. However, they were greeted not by Richard or Donald, but by Richard's wife, Joanne Rainello. To their astonishment, Joanne revealed that she was the one who had called in the tip about the bodies. She then told them the chilling truth behind Gustavus and Jane Doe's murder. She disclosed how the couple, seeking refuge from the police after Gustavus's escape, had arrived at their doorstep on December 28, 1970. Richard, ever the schemer, swiftly established the alias of a married couple for them, with Gustavus taking on the persona of Dick and his partner assuming the identity of Lorraine. Shockingly, Richard had stolen his identity from a real woman named Lorraine, whom he had encountered at a motel. He also stole her driver's license and social security card, effectively taking her identity for his nefarious purposes. Now, this unsuspecting woman unwittingly lived out the remainder of her days under a stolen identity. Gustavus assumed the role of Lorraine's husband, and they tried to blend in and live a normal life to avoid drawing police attention. However, Lorraine grew increasingly wary of Richard's intentions. she confided her concerns to Joanne, expressing her unease about using a false identity and the fear of being caught by the police. Lorraine's anxiety mounted as she grappled with the uncertainty of what she'd say if questioned about her fabricated life. After their conversation, Joanne told Richard everything, which made him increasingly anxious. He realized the grave threat posed by Lorraine's suspicions and the risk of unraveling their criminal enterprise. In a desperate attempt to protect their interests, Richard hastily called his partner Donald from Rhode Island to Ledyard. Together, they devised a sinister plan to eliminate both Gustavus and Lorraine. On December 31st, 1970, Richard fabricated a macabre trap, luring the couple to his house on Shoeville Road. Joanne, aware of the impending tragedy, remained outside the house as Richard set his deadly scheme into motion. Initially, Richard engaged Gustavus and Lorraine in casual conversation, lulling them into a false sense of security. However, in a sudden turn of events, Richard rose from his seat and fired a fatal shot at Gustavus while he was innocently setting down a box. As Gustavus shivered in shock, Richard put another bullet in his chest to ensure he was dead. With Gustavus now lying lifeless before him, Richard turned his attention to Lorraine, intending to silence her as well. But to his dismay, he discovered that the gun was empty, as all its bullets had already been used on Gustavus. But Richard held Lorraine in place while Donald reloaded the gun. Then Donald aimed the weapon at Lorraine and fired a single shot, which ended her life. Both Gustavus and Lorraine were now dead, and Richard knew he had to act quickly. He reached out to their third partner, James Gardner, and called him to the scene under the guise of needing assistance with a pressing issue. When Gardner arrived, Richard confessed to him about the murders. At first, Gardner was shocked, but he eventually agreed to help Richard and Donald bury the bodies. Joanne learned about the murders when Richard picked her up after burying the bodies. He confessed everything to her during the ride home, and when Joanne returned home, she found Donald cleaning up the blood, which confirmed Richard's confession. After the shocking revelation and gathering all the details, the police immediately launched into action to locate Richard and Donald. It didn't take long before they tracked them down and arrested them. Initially, Richard denied any involvement in the murders or even knowing the couple. However, the truth became undeniable, especially with Joanne's compelling testimony in court, leaving no doubt about their guilt. Finally, on November 15, 1974, 4 years after the murders and 5 months after the bodies were discovered, a grand jury pronounced Richard and Donald guilty of the couple's murders. They were sentenced to life in prison. While the perpetrators were held accountable for their crimes, the case still remained unsolved. No one knew the true identity of Jane Doe, not even Richard and his wife. Gustavus might have held the key to her identity, but with his demise, the mystery remained unsolved. A newspaper article mentioned that the last known information about Jane Doe was that she may have worked in New York, possibly as a sex worker, and was believed to have relatives in Tennessee and West Virginia. However, this lead wasn't sufficient for the police to make any conclusive determinations at that time. As time passed, the case grew colder with no breakthrough in identifying the victim. Despite this, the authorities refused to let the mystery fade away. Over the years, with advancements in technology, their dedication to identifying the victim never waned. With each new tool, hope surged that closure for the victim and her family was within reach. In a last-ditch effort to solve the case, police entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, in July 2011, hoping for a breakthrough. Despite the tireless efforts of law enforcement, the woman's identity remained elusive. Then, in 2022, a new ray of hope emerged. The Connecticut office of the Chief Medical Examiner collaborated with Otham's Laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, to submit forensic evidence for analysis. This partnership aimed to tackle the backlog of cold cases in Connecticut and potentially provide answers to long-standing mysteries. Othram scientists worked diligently to extract DNA from the evidence and utilized forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a detailed DNA profile of the unidentified woman. Armed with this profile, Otham's forensic genetic genealogy team collaborated with medico-legal death investigator Michelle Clark to conduct a forensic genetic genealogy search. This innovative approach led to the discovery of potential relatives of the murdered woman, providing new avenues for the investigation. After years of anticipation, the conclusive DNA testing revealed the woman's identity as Linda Sue Childers, born on September 4th, 1948, hailing from Louisville, Kentucky. The news brought closure, but also heartbreak to Linda's daughter and sister, who chose to remain anonymous but had long awaited answers. Finally, after enduring years of uncertainty, she was identified and the case was closed, providing solace to the victims and their loved ones. On November 11th, 1988, in the Canadian city of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, something dreadful unfolded. Byron Carr, a 36-year-old high school teacher, was expected at a family gathering, but he never arrived. Unable to contact him, his worried family went to his house to check on him. But what they found there was heart-wrenching. Their beloved brother Byron was lying lifeless on his bed, stabbed to death. As the police investigated, they found that Byron had a secret, a truth he'd kept hidden from most people in his life, including his family. Byron's family and the Charlottetown community were shaken to their core as a killer was on the loose. Who could have committed such a heinous act against Byron, and why? And what was the secret Byron had been keeping? On Friday, November 11th, 1988, worry set in for Byron's family when he failed to show up for a planned family gathering, and their phone calls went unanswered throughout the night. The next morning, on November 12th, they decided to check on him at his house in Charlottetown. When they arrived at Byron's place, they found the back door unlocked. Inside, the house seemed undisturbed. His dog barked from its kennel, and dishes sat on the counter. But Byron was nowhere to be found. In uneasy silence, they walked to his bedroom door. There, on the bed, lay Byron. He was long gone. Initial shock turned to horror as they realized he'd been stabbed.
At first, we didn't see the knife, at first. I think it was kind of, we were just standing in the hallway at first, and I just went to the phone and we called an ambulance, and then when we took another look and saw the knife and everything, then I just went back to the phone and I just called the operator, and she got the police.
The arrival of the police kickstarted a thorough investigation. Investigators determined that Byron had actually been strangled, with a stab wound inflicted after his death. Among the things at Byron's house, police uncovered crucial evidence. A pair of unfamiliar underwear was found at the scene, along with a pair of socks discarded in the trash. These seemed out of place and were bagged for further examination. The underwear was found to contain male bodily fluid from an unknown man, which revealed a secret that shocked even Byron's family. Byron was gay and had been intimate with a man shortly before he was murdered. To learn about his final hours, the police spoke to his friends. They learned that Byron had met up with them on the evening of November 10th for coffee. Later, he headed out to meet other friends in Charlottetown. Witnesses placed him at a couple of bars that night where he'd been socializing and enjoying himself. Interviews with his friends suggested that Byron's last known movement was shortly before 3 a.m. on November 11th, when Byron had picked up a friend and driven them home. How did a man who had left home for a fun night out end up dead in his own bed? The circumstances of the case puzzled the police. Byron's orientation posed extra challenges to the investigation. Witnesses and friends were hesitant to come forward, afraid of outing themselves in a society that was less accepting of LGBTQ+ individuals. These factors contributed to the case quickly going cold. Some people even believed the police weren't taking the case seriously due to Byron's sexuality. It would be many years until the Charlottetown police got a breakthrough, allowing them to piece together Byron's last known sighting. 2 decades after the case had gone cold, the investigation took a dramatic turn when a crucial detail emerged in 2008. A witness came forward, stating they'd seen Byron in the early hours of November 11th, 1988, shortly before his death. The witness said that Byron had stopped his car at an intersection around 3 a.m. to talk to a man on a bicycle. After a brief conversation, Byron had continued towards home, and the cyclist had also headed in the same direction, seemingly following Byron to his place. This information shed new light on the case, but considering it had surfaced 20 years later, police were initially skeptical. But when the witness passed a polygraph test, they knew they had an important lead. Police believed this unknown cyclist had followed Byron home, where the two had been intimate with each other. However, things turned tragic, with this unknown man strangling Byron to death. The mystery deepened further when more witnesses came forward in subsequent years. One person reported having seen an unfamiliar car parked outside Byron's home for some time on the evening of November 11th before being driven away at a high speed. This made it look like the killer had returned to Byron's house later in the day after committing the murder. The police believed that the killer had either returned alone or met up with an accomplice at Byron's house on the evening of November 11th. They'd returned to clean up the scene to remove evidence such as fingerprints and DNA. They wore socks to avoid leaving traces. One of them had stabbed Byron long after he was already dead, possibly to leave a more gruesome mark. Then the pair had fled the scene. Then came a critical revelation from one of Byron's former students, a mystery man who was obsessed with Byron.
Byron telling me about this man who would routinely phone him, who it appeared wanted some sort of relationship, be it long-term, short-term, I don't know.
Unfortunately, this didn't help much, and the investigation ended up right back where it started. Then, investigators developed a profile of the killer, hoping to crack the cold case. The killer was thought to be a young man, aged between 15 and 25 years at the time, who likely lived a high-risk lifestyle in Charlottetown. They suspected the killer was bisexual or gay, and possibly had a history of minor criminal activity. The most important evidence found at the scene included a pair of unfamiliar underwear and a handwritten note stating, "I will kill again." Handwriting analysis revealed that the perpetrator had a distinct writing style, characterized by circular motions and dotted circles above the eyes. However, investigators believed the note wasn't a genuine threat, but rather an angry outburst. The theory was that the killer and his accomplice had returned to the house in search of the missing underwear, which was accidentally left behind after the initial encounter with Byron. When they were unable to find it, they lashed out in anger and left the threatening note behind. The recovered underwear was identified as a medium-sized bikini-style Zeller's brand with a 29.5-inch waist. Years later in the 2000s, technological advancements enabled the investigators to analyze the male bodily fluid on the fabric sample to extract DNA. The results confirmed the DNA was not Byron's, and neither did it match anyone in the national database, a strong clue that it belonged to the killer. Another crucial piece of evidence was the discarded pair of socks, which also contained DNA. While police managed to identify the person who had worn the socks, they withheld this information from public knowledge. This individual was the killer's accomplice, but they'd already died in the late 1990s, leading the investigation to an unfortunate dead end. The Charlottetown police were still determined to solve Byron's case, no matter how long it took. They collected DNA samples from everyone potentially connected to Byron, including men he might have met at the bars that night, but no match was found. In 2018, the police received 2 cryptic phone calls from an unknown man near Charlottetown Mall. He claimed to have crucial information about Byron's murder, and his voice was filled with urgency. However, he vanished as quickly as he appeared and left no trace of his identity or contact details. More than 3 decades had passed since Byron's tragic demise, yet the truth remained elusive. While the police believed they'd identified the accomplice, the identity of Byron's killer remained a haunting mystery. Then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough emerged, breathing new life into the investigation. After 35 long years, police found some hope in the Byron car murder case. In the spring of 2022, investigators took a gamble. They revisited the evidence from the crime scene and subjected the piece of underwear to genetic genealogy testing. This involved uploading the DNA profile to genetic testing databases in hopes of finding a match with relatives of the killer. It was a long process, but it paid off. In January 2024, the police finally had a lead. Todd Joseph Gallant, now 56 years old, would have been just 21 at the time of the murder. Memories of that November day in 1988 surely came flooding back for many. Investigators weren't strangers to Gallant's name. He had a prior conviction in Prince Edward Island for breaking and entering in 1987. Back then, he'd lived in Charlottetown, close to Byron Carr. He'd left town shortly after the murder and moved to the United States before finally returning to Charlottetown in 2022. On January 26, 2024, Gallant was arrested for Byron Carr's murder and charged with first-degree murder and interfering with human remains. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there were more questions than answers. What had exactly happened that night? What would have driven Gallant to commit such a crime? For Byron's family, the wait for justice continues. Byron's brother John couldn't help but sob when the Charlottetown police officially charged Gallant for the murder. John's emotions were intense as he spoke about his brother. The investigation faced many challenges due to societal prejudices and the fear of outing witnesses, leaving many questions unanswered. Now, as the trial draws near, they cling to the hope that Gallant's sentencing will bring justice and closure in this long unsolved case, while also highlighting the wider issues of prejudice and violence against the LGBTQ+ community. Was Byron Carr's murder driven by hatred for orientation, or is there more to the story? The truth remains hidden for now, but time will inevitably bring it to light. And if you have any cases you'd like us to explore, feel free to leave your suggestions. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mysterious 7 for more captivating true stories like this one.